Chapter 1145. While the two of them were talking, Sima Quan had already flown out. However, he soon felt that something was wrong. He could only go out for 1,000 miles at most. This distance was only a step for the people of the heavenly abode. Moreover, they were all under the cover of the twin demons subduing mirrors. As long as the opponent used the mirrors, there was nowhere to hide. He would only die. However, after waiting for a long time, he didn't see the light of the mirrors. He couldn't help but be surprised and thought to himself, could it be that I can't use the mirrors here? Thinking of this, he felt his spirits lift. He also realized that Qi Hongchan was nowhere to be seen. Without the Pingdu sect leader, he only had to deal with Pang Yunxiang. This meant that he wasn't really at the end of the road. He might still have a chance to escape. Thus, his body trembled, and thousands of devils appeared, howling as they charged forward. Meanwhile, his figure flickered, disappearing into nothingness, secretly observing from the side. As long as he could sneak into the other party's knowledge sea, he would win this battle. Spiritual Master Pang didn't use the mirrors because he was ordered to capture Sima Quan alive and use him as a sacrifice to the 10,000 lightning pool. Since the opponent was trapped here and there was only void chi around her, no matter how she used her magic power, it wouldn't affect the continent. It was convenient for her to use her methods. Seeing Sima Quan's figure disappear, she used her magic power and opened her law eye. In her field of vision, she saw a ball of obscure essence chi hiding 1,000 miles away. It didn't rush over with the demons. Thus, she spread out her 5 fingers, and lightning immediately appeared in her palm. With a thunderous sound, the devils that were charging at her were blown to pieces. However, she knew very well that this was just to attract her attention. As expected, a cold wind blew from the right. She tilted her head slightly and a picture of a pai xiu appeared on her neck. She opened her mouth and swallowed the foul air. There was no sound here, but it was quiet behind her. This time, it crashed into her without any obstructions. However, the moment it touched her Taoist robe, a ball of spiritual fire flew up. With a miserable howl, the demon turned into a pile of ashes, and the spiritual fire weakened slightly. Her Taoist robe and accessories were all specially refined. Even the invisible demon wouldn't be able to get on him before the robe was damaged. Just now, with this test, Sima Quan, who was hiding at the side, could see that normal methods were useless against this Anutta Temple female cultivator. Furthermore, there wasn't much room to maneuver in this place, so he couldn't display his advantage of being able to fly quickly. The only advantage he had was that his opponent had spent more transcendence energy than him after running for several days and nights. If it was an ordinary cultivator, they might be able to compete with him in magic power and divine abilities. However, it was different for the cultivators of Huanzhen Temple. It could be said that all their methods were used to restrain demonic cultivators and demonic beings. It was also useful against a demonic cultivator like him. It would not be easy to win in a direct confrontation. Right now, the best strategy was to send his doppelgangers to search for a way out while his main body delayed the battle as much as possible. After making up his mind, he took out the chi-gazing ring and placed it on top of his head. Under a ray of black light, he instantly felt that his mana seemed to have become stronger. Thus, he gathered his mana. He spat out a mouthful of yin energy. All of a sudden, the chilly wind blew, whistling wildly. However, there were no ripples in the surrounding smoke. This was the formless yin wind that he painstakingly cultivated after becoming a sky demon. Even a Taoist paradise Shinran would be tainted by the demonic qi if he came into contact with even a little bit of it. He wouldn't be able to get rid of it within a few hours and would lose his ability to fight back. He originally planned to use it as his trump card, but if he couldn't get out this time, he might be killed. Thus, he didn't care about it anymore. After this mouthful of yin wind came out, he used up more than half of his mana. In addition to the damage he suffered earlier, it could be said that after using this technique, he had completely lost his ability to fight back. Taoist Pang only needed to listen to the sound to identify the origin of the wind. He immediately revealed a vigilant expression, but he didn't panic. The cultivators of Huanzhen Temple who were able to form their grotto heavens were all outstanding among the lower generation cultivators. They fought their way up. After forming their grotto heavens, they had to read the Book of Conquering the Demon, which recorded all kinds of Taoist techniques and supernatural powers of the demon sect. It was also recorded in the book about the battle with the Genin demon tens of thousands of years ago. However, she had been prepared for this. She raised her hand and summoned a jade plate into the sky. As soon as it appeared, it immediately froze the Yin wind and began to weaken it. It seemed that it wouldn't take long for the Yin wind to dissipate. Sima Quan saw that she easily stopped the formless Yin wind, and his heart skipped a beat. However, although his mana was almost exhausted, he still had some tricks up his sleeves. He suddenly raised his head and blew a few mouthfuls of demonic smoke at the top of the chi circle. Then, a demon with short arms jumped out from the circle. This was a demon that he created by combining the Netherworld Spring Sex technique and the Sky Demon's technique. He also mixed the shards of the sunglasses into it. It looked only slightly different from a normal demon, but it was completely different on the inside. Moreover, it had developed intelligence. Even he himself might not be able to control it. Now that he was facing the cultivators of Huanzhen Temple's grotto heavens, he had very few tricks up his sleeves. He had no choice but to release it. When the demon came out, it looked at Sima Quan with a strange look in its eyes. Then, it turned around and rushed forward. As it flew, its figure flickered, as if it was changing back and forth between tangible and intangible. Moreover, its speed was getting faster and faster. Taoist Master Pang also saw that this demon was not ordinary. She didn't dare to be careless. She retreated and took out a jade jar with 2 ears. She opened the seal and dozens of thunderbolts burst out. This was the real demon subduing thunderbolt. Every single one of them was personally refined by her, so its power was needless to say. The moment the thunderbolt came out, Sima Quan immediately felt a stabbing pain all over his body. He was terrified and felt that the thunderbolt was a great threat to him. He quickly retreated and only stopped when he could no longer retreat. At this moment, the demon subduing thunderbolt had already landed on the body of the demon. However, it was as if it had collided with a shadow. It passed through and didn't touch the demon at all. Sima Quan laughed coldly. That pair of sunglasses belonged to an ancient almighty cultivator. After this demon refined it into the shard, it was instantly destroyed. After the demon refined the shard, it could change between tangible and intangible thousands of times in a single breath. However, both of them had their own ways of restraining it. It was almost impossible to accurately control it. However, it was possible to try luck. However, in a battle of magical powers between cultivators, if they really placed their hopes of winning or losing on luck, then they wouldn't be too far off. Taoist Master Pang also saw some clues. It wasn't difficult for her to guess the changes here. Although she had never seen such a demon before, she had seen many strange secret techniques and naturally had a way to deal with it. She raised her hand and held the corner of her sleeve with her other hand. With a shake of her hand, countless bamboo sticks flew out. They were all small and light, and they fluttered toward the demon's body. These bamboo sticks could only surround the demon's body and were attached to them by thunderbolts. As long as the opponent's body was filled with turbid chi, they would revolve around the demon and continuously slash at it. However, the demon's body was a ball. It changed from the size of a person to the size of a grain of rice. The bamboo sticks couldn't change with it. Because they were affected by the devil chi, they stuck to it one by one. Soon they all gathered together and looked like bamboo balls. However, because the demon was too small, only a few of them were effective against it. In just a moment, she sensed that the bamboo sticks were disappearing at an extremely fast speed. It was obvious that they were being destroyed one by one. Although this demon-subduing treasure could restrain demons, it would also be worn down by the devil chi. Sima Quan was actually very afraid of this demon because it was very abnormal after being refined. To a certain extent, it even had more potential than him. That was why he wasn't willing to let it out so easily. In his heart, he really hoped to see both sides suffer. Taoist Master Pang pondered and said, "This demon is very strange. It seems to have intelligence. Fighting it is like adding an enemy out of thin air. It won't be a matter of 2 hours to deal with it. Moreover, Sima Quan is here, so there's no need to continue fighting. After thinking about it, she decisively took out the twin demon subduing mirrors. After the two mirrors flew out, they faced outwards and shone at the demon. Instantly, a rainbow of light shot out. As soon as it met, an incomparably mournful scream came from inside. Then, a cloud of black smoke seemed to wriggle under the light. In just 1 or 2 breaths, it turned into a drop of black oil that looked like molten wax and fell down. When Sima Quan saw that she was actually able to use the twin demons subduing mirrors, his face immediately turned pale. This meant that his previous judgment was completely wrong. Even here, it didn't prevent her from using the real treasure. However, this also made him very confused. Since she could kill him in an instant, why did she still want to fight him? If she wanted to use him to practice, it was unreasonable to make such a big fuss. Especially when even the Pingdu sect leader came out to help, it was even more impossible for her to have such a goal. Then the biggest possibility left was that she wanted to capture him and bring him back. He couldn't guess what her goal was, but he had to do something about it. So he said loudly, "Taoist Master Pang, you probably want to capture me and bring me back. Although I don't know why, everything can be discussed. If you're not willing, I'll just kill myself here. You also know that I have countless clones. At worst, I'll just start all over again." A hint of disdain appeared in Taoist Master Pang's eyes. She really couldn't capture this demon alive and couldn't refine the pool of 10,000 refinements lightning. She also wouldn't compromise with any demon. Moreover, she had already set up everything, so she didn't care. She flipped her palm, and countless demon-subduing runes appeared in her palm. They immediately resonated with the jade plate above her. When Sima Quan saw her like this, his expression changed. Then his voice turned cold and he said, "If that's the case, then we'll meet again in the future. When I come out of seclusion, I'll definitely make your entire sect restless." Taoist Master Pang didn't seem to hear his threatening words. She only focused on controlling the talisman. When Sima Quan saw this, he completely gave up. He didn't want to be captured alive, so he circulated his mana and wanted to disperse his qi. However, at this moment, he found that he couldn't move. He immediately revealed a look of astonishment. At this moment, the jade plate above his head shrouded him with a spiritual light. He didn't even have the slightest strength to resist. He was sucked in. Taoist Master Pang let out a sigh of relief. With a wave of her hand, the jade plate fell into her hand. To be continued, search the color, and you can read the following chapters in full. Chapter 1146. Within the small world of the upper extreme hall, 2 peaks faced off against each other. A torrent of water rumbled past, its momentum was turbulent, and white steam billowed out. Qi Yuntian and Zhang Yan each sat on a mountain, their gazes fixed on the river below. After 10 years of refinement, the forbidden light of the heavenly water was about to be completed. Bursts of light seeped out from the river, and there was a clear gurgling sound. Listening to it was relaxing and pleasing to the ears. Within the light, there was a sense of liveliness and joy, as if it had come to life. In reality, if one delved deeper into it, the forbidden light was not a dead object, but one that had a trace of spirituality. As long as there was enough vitality, it could grow on its own, and even become a real living being. Shen Baishuang's living cloud water sword was also made using this water as a reference. Just now, he had created it. However, he was not a direct descendant of the sect leader, nor did he specialize in the water palace, so he could not obtain the complete refinement method and could only rely on himself. At this stage, there was no need for Qi Yuntian and Zhang Yan to interfere. They only needed to wait for the final form of the divine water forbidden light. After waiting for about 20 days, the beam of light rose up and soared into the sky. It seemed to have opened up a mysterious hole and continued to enter it. Just as it was about to completely sink into the hole, it seemed as if something had been broken, and the other end of the beam of light poked out from not too far away. At this moment, the light seemed to come from nothingness, and went back into nothingness, without a beginning or an end. Qi Yuntian said, "After 10 years, it has finally been refined." He stretched out his hand and tore off a part of the light, sending it to Zhang Yan. this is half of the forbidden light of the heavenly water, Junior Zhang, please keep it well. Zhang Yan did not stand on ceremony, he bowed and looked at it. The divine light was like water, it turned into strands and flew into the space between his eyebrows. The good thing about this water was that it had spirituality. It was naturally close to the person who refined it. If it was someone else, they would definitely struggle violently. Even if it was someone else, they would not let it fall into the hands of an outsider. However, he still needed to go back and test it out to find out exactly how powerful it was. Qi Yuntian also kept his portion of the divine light and said, in the past, when refining the divine water forbidden light, one of the most important external ingredients could only be replaced by the Fudu mysterious water. Fortunately, Junior Brother brought back the deep abyss heavy water last time, which allowed us to reproduce the true power of the divine light. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Senior Brother Qi is overpraising me. I was able to get the heavy water this time. It was also sect leader Reverend's order that the work of all Reverends was the result of the joint efforts of all the Reverends, not my own work. Qi Yuntian nodded and said, I wonder how Junior Hua is doing under the CI. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Senior Martial Brother Hua practices the golden fire technique, so he should be like a fish in water in that realm. I hope he can get back in time before it starts. Qi Yuntian said, that would be best. After the two of them exchanged a few more words, Zhang Yan got up and bade farewell. Qi Yuntian personally sent him out and asked him to stay at the entrance of the hall. Then Qi Yuntian returned to the Duzhen Hall. For the past 10 years, he was not refining the forbidden light all the time, but only used the spiritual opportunity at the crucial moment. Most of the time, he was still using the deep abyss heavy water to train his mana. The earth-splitting heaven and earth leaf was also being nurtured. After sitting down in the hall, Jing Yu came up and said, Master, the elders have done what you instructed me to do. The talismans are all here. As he was speaking, he bowed and placed a jade box on the table. Zhang Yan flipped through the talismans. The talismans were pretty good. Even if there were flaws, it was not because the elders did not put in the effort. It was because of the limitations of their mana and cultivation base, they could not do better. However, these talismans could not be used yet. The next most crucial step of refining had to be completed by him. So, he instructed. He rolled up his sleeves and brought the jade box in, then walked into the inner room. In the Bu Pavilion, Han Zhuqing was riding a small boat on the lake, drinking alone. However, he looked a little depressed. There was a ripple in the lake, and a golden dragon leaped out. It gradually changed in midair and shrunk to the length of a foot. It landed lightly on the boat and said with dissatisfaction, Brother Han, you have good wine. Why are you drinking alone and not calling old Ao? You are not loyal at all. Han Zhuqing did not say a word and drank another cup. Ao Tong looked at him strangely and said, Why, Brother Han, are you facing some difficulties? Han Zhuqing sighed. A few days ago, Master called all the senior apprentice sisters and senior apprentice brother to give pointers. Even junior apprentice brother did not fall behind, but I am like an outsider. Ao Tong did not think much of it and said, I thought it was something big. You should eat as much as you want. Old Ao, I will be honest, Brother Han, you are not as good as your fellow disciples. Master has seen it clearly and let you be free and unfettered, so why bother yourself? Han Zhuqing smiled bitterly and said, I also know my own abilities. It's just that I've heard from a few of my fellow disciples that the great calamity of this world is coming, but I can't share Master's burden. As a disciple, I'm really useless. Calamity is coming? Ao Tong rolled his eyes and said hesitantly, If you really think so, there is a way. Han Zhuqing looked over and said, Does Brother Ao have an idea? Ao Tong raised his head and said, Of course, if I help you, Master will definitely praise you. Han Zhuqing did not believe it and said doubtfully, Really? If that is the case, why didn't Master come and take care of you? Ao Tong said angrily, That is because I, old Ao, did not take out that thing, or else I would have gone to the palace of Duzhen, drinking wine and eating mystical pills every day. Why would I drink such inferior wine here? Han Zhuqing saw that Ao Tong was serious and asked curiously, What is it that Brother Ao is talking about? Ao Tong straightened his body and said proudly, the Ao clan was ordered by our ancestors to guard a piece of monster skin for generations. Han Zwicheng was surprised. Monster skin? His expression suddenly became excited. Could it be the skin of a heavenly monster? Ao Tong said disdainfully, although the skin of a heavenly monster is precious, it is not as good as this. Ao Tong wanted to keep him in suspense, but he could not hold it in any more. He lowered his voice and said mysteriously, let me tell you, that is the skin of a Zhuoxiao Xian bird, and not just any Zhuoxiao Xian bird, it is the most precious flower skin on the back of the king bird. What? Zhuoxiao Xian bird? Han Zwicheng almost dropped the wine cup in his hand. He jumped up and stared at Ao Tong. Old Ao, you are not lying to me. Ao Tong said unhappily, you are looking down on me. Why would I joke about such a thing? Han Zwicheng sat down and clapped his fist. If it is really this thing, I will give it to my teacher. If I give it to Master, Master will definitely be happy. Ao Tong said proudly, of course, I dare to say that. Even a Taoist grotto heaven like Master has heard of such a good thing. I have only heard of it, but I have never seen it. Han Zwicheng nodded. It was no wonder he was so excited. This Zhuoxiao Xian bird was not a simple monster. It was a mutated species that had transcended the restraints of a realm and could travel between realms. After the cultivators from beyond the heavens came, this bird also came not long after. Then, it settled down on the Middle Pillar continent. This bird was even more terrifying than the heavenly monster, especially since it usually fed on cultivators. After it was surrounded by people, it even flew out of the void. At that time, there were about 1,000 Zhuoxiao Xian birds that came to this realm, and they were all protected by the wings of a king bird before they crossed the door between the two realms. When the West Continent cultivators and the demons started a war, these bird demons and dragon monarchs joined hands and wanted to destroy the cultivators. However, although the West Continent cultivators suffered from internal strife, their vitality was damaged. With the help of the cultivators from beyond the heavens, their strength did not increase, but decreased. When the two sides fought, the Shaoqing sect's patriarch Venerable Hongba. He climbed to the top of the Middle Pillar continent and killed the entire Zhuoxiao Xian bird tribe with just one sword. However, because the continent was too high, even Venerable Yaoan's Jade Cliff could not protect it, and it collapsed. After that battle, the people on the continent only saw a rain of blood that lasted for several days. The Middle Pillar continent was irrigated by the blood of the demon birds, and since then, it became the most fertile land. There were even exaggerated rumors. The skin of the king bird only needed to be worn on the body. It had the ability to travel through the void. Thinking of this, Han Zwicheng reacted. He asked, such a rare item, old Ao, where did you get it from? Ao Tong said, I've said it before, the Ao clan was ordered by our ancestors to guard the skin. As he said this, his mood was a little down. My poor Ao clan, we were targeted by those monster carps, our clansmen were all slaughtered, only I managed to escape. Han Zwicheng heard this and sighed, comforted him, and asked again, if we guard it for our ancestors, will it be a problem if we go and retrieve it? Ao Tong answered, don't worry, the Ao clan promised to guard it for 10,000 years. If no one comes to retrieve it by then, it will belong to the Ao clan. The time limit is long over. Han Zwicheng hurriedly asked, then where is the skin now? Ao Tong smiled mysteriously and said, I will not say that first, but that item is really too big, Brother Han, you will not be able to retrieve it. Han Zwicheng asked curiously, how big is it? Ao Tong showed off. An ordinary Xiao bird is the size of a mountain, the king bird is as big as a continent. Back then, a cultivator from beyond the heavens used this bird as a mount and built a temple on it. Rumor has it that it was because of this that the entire monster bird clan chased after him. With your arcane energy, how can you lift this thing? Han Zwicheng was shocked. According to what you said, how could the Middle Pillar continent accommodate this flock of monster birds? Ao Tong said, the king bird no longer needs to stay on land, it usually only roams in the outer space. Coming to the Middle Pillar continent is just a place where it can raise its descendants. Han Zwicheng's eyes lit up. He asked, if that's the case, where are the eggs? Ao Tong said, the Xiao Xiao bird clan was annihilated by perfected Hong Ho alone. If he has any, no one can question him. But from what I can see, even if there are any, they are probably in the hands of the Shaoqing faction. Moreover, this bird only lives for 10,000 years. Brother Han, it is useless even if you have it. Han Zhuqing sighed. Then, the one who hired your Ao clan to guard this kingbird's skin was the ancestor of the Shaoqing faction? Ao Tong shook his head. No, it was perfected Hong Ho who used it as proof of him annihilating the bird clan. Later on, the owner of the Ao clan, who is also a cultivator from the Xianyu Palace of the West Continent, exchanged for it with a hefty price. You might not know this, but the Xianyu Palace branch is now the Nanhua faction. Han Zhuqing was surprised. Didn't the Nanhua faction's founding master claim to be one family, no other teachings? Ao Tong curled his lips in disdain. If it wasn't for the legacy of the Xianyu Palace, how would they be where they are today? If no one comes out to expose these words, wouldn't they just be bragging about themselves? Chapter 1147. After Han Zhuqing figured out the origin of the pelt, he was even more eager to send it to his teacher, but Ao Tong refused to reveal its whereabouts. After living with Ao Tong for hundreds of years, he was very familiar with Ao Tong's temperament. Thus, he praised Ao Tong a little and Ao Tong finally revealed its whereabouts. Under the Nine-Tune Stream Palace, there is an underground river. As long as you follow it, you will be able to reach that place. Han Zhuqing waited for a while but did not hear anything else, so he asked again, what happens after we pass through the underground river? Ao Tong answered straightforwardly, I don't know. Han Zhuqing was stunned. You don't know? Ao Tong coughed and said, my Ao clan's grand ancestor once said that the descendants will be able to find something as long as they reach the realm. This is definitely true, or else the Ao clan wouldn't have guarded this place for 10,000 years. Han Zhuqing thought about it and felt that it made sense. No wonder Ao Tong refused to speak just now. It turned out that he did not know much. But then he thought again and asked, isn't the Nine-Tune Stream Palace where the Surging Waves Lake is located? It belongs to the 3 pools of water, so it should be Qinsong School's territory. Why would Xianyu Palace place the door to find the kingbird's pelt there? Ao Tong said, I heard from my grand ancestor that although Qinsong School occupied a large area of land in the north, it did not have many disciples. Some of the cultivation lands were lent to their friends so that they could help out in times of trouble. And the second grand ancestor of Qinsong School and a few Daoren of Xianyu Palace were on good terms, so this underground river was set up at that time. Han Zhuqing shook his head and said with a smile, this senior has found a good place to hide his family's treasure using the Dark Azure sect's name. No one would have thought of this even if they cracked their brains. Ao Tong snorted and said, my poor Ao clan, we thought this place was not dangerous and just now agreed to guard it. But then, the Qinsong School fell into internal strife and the 3 pools were occupied by the 3 tribes, causing our clan to suffer as well. Han Zhuqing sighed, this is fate. Moreover, the matter is already over, so you don't have to worry too much about it. But sooner or later, my Qinsong School will fight with the North Nether Continent's demon tribe. Who knows, you might be able to get your revenge then. Ao Tong instantly became much more spirited, and he repeatedly walked in circles on the spot as he said, not bad, there's a possibility. Han Zhuqing said, old Ao, why don't you come with me to the Palace of Purity and inform Master about this? Ao Tong listened. He lay down on the deck and said, Grandpa Ao, I won't go. Han Zhuqing asked in surprise, why is that? Ao Tong replied, this is something that I, old Ao, have given to you, Brother Han. If I go, wouldn't it be old Ao's contribution? Han Zhuqing laughed in spite of himself and said, it's your credit, and it's my credit. So what? It's fine as long as I can help Master. Ao Tong shook his head and said, how is it the same? I, old Ao, am only a pawn under the Master, so the benefits I receive are limited. But Brother Han is different. You are the Master's disciple. It must be a great benefit to me. Besides, you have benefited from it. Don't you want me to benefit as well? Han Zhucheng did not care about this, but hearing what Ao Tong said made sense. He said, although I'm not going for the benefits, if I get anything, I won't forget old Ao. Ao Tong chuckled and said, then it's settled. After Han Zhucheng asked about the location of the underground river and the way to enter, he flew into the sky without saying anything to anyone. He picked a fast-flying spirit bird and went all the way out. Just half a day later, he arrived in front of the surging waves lake. Although he did not doubt what Ao Tong said, but he still decided to explore it himself. This was the place where the sect leader's nominal disciple, Miao Kuan, cultivated. However, this person also knew that he had occupied such a large piece of land and was bound to be hated by others. Even if there were disciples cultivating in the lake, he would turn a blind eye and not drive them away. Because of this, when Han Zhucheng arrived here, no one came to ask questions. After circling around the lake, he quickly found the location that Ao Tong mentioned and went down to the bottom of the lake to explore. In just an hour, he found the underground river and dived in without hesitation. 3 days later, he came back from the bottom of the lake, but his face was filled with joy. He adjusted his chi slightly and headed towards the floating heavenly palace. When he was in the sky, he used the talisman that Zhang Yan gave him and a ray of light protected him. He broke through the strong wind and headed straight for the Duzhen Hall. Just now, when he arrived at the empty space in front of the hall, a boy came up to him and bowed. Sage Han, the hall master knows that you are here. He said that there is no need to inform you. Just enter. Han Zhucheng expressed his thanks and tidied up his attire before stepping into the inner room. He walked all the way to the main hall and saw Zhang Yan sitting high up on the jade platform. He bowed and said, Disciple Han Zhucheng pays his respects to Master and wishes Master a long life. Zhang Yan first called him up and asked, You are in a hurry to see me today and you did not send me a letter beforehand. Is there something important? Han Zhucheng bowed and said, Master, please understand. I found out where a mysterious item was buried. I did not dare to hide it from you, so I wanted to present it to you. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Since you are so serious, this treasure must be something special. Where did you find out about it? Han Zhucheng told the whole story and did not take credit for it at all. He only said that he found out about it from Ao Tong and was willing to present it to his master. Left Freedom Kingbird? Zhang Yan looked like he was deep in thought. He was currently searching for precious materials to prepare for the god's trial. If it was really the left Freedom Kingbird's fur, it would be very useful. Han Zhucheng said again, although I found out about it from senior brother Ao, but because it has been 10,000 years, I am afraid that something has happened to the fur. I have already gone to find out the path. The prohibition at the end is not broken. It seems that no one has found this place for many years. I did not dare to enter recklessly, so I came to report to you. Zhang Yan nodded his head. After thinking for a while, he raised his hand and an illusion appeared in front of him. It was the location of the surging waves lake. He said, Where is the entrance to the underground river? Han Zhucheng looked for a while and pointed to a place. It is there. Ever since Zhang Yan broke through the 6 barriers, if no one deliberately covered it up and there was no spiritual opportunity to disturb him, he could see any place on the 9 continents by using his mana. At this moment he looked over and saw an underground river. Naturally, he did not need to go there personally like Han Zhucheng. Instead, he sensed the spiritual opportunity and followed the source of the river. Very quickly he found the end of the river. In an instant, from top to bottom, he saw the situation clearly without missing anything. He smiled, waved his hand and said, Come with me. After saying that, Han Zhucheng felt his vision blurred. When he looked around again, he was already in front of a mountain with lush vegetation and beautiful flowers. He did not recognize it, so he asked doubtfully, Master? Zhang Yan looked down and said, The fur is here. Han Zhucheng came to a realization. Is it at the foot of the mountain? Zhang Yan shook his head. Not the foot of the mountain. If I am not wrong, the entire mountain is made up of the fur. It is just that flowers and trees are planted on it to cover it. If one does not know the inside story and his cultivation is not up to par, even if he finds the place where the treasure is buried, I am afraid it will be for naught. Han Zhuqing was stunned, then he said angrily, "The ancestors of Xianyu Palace are also cunning. They clearly said that the past 10,000 years will be given to others, but they still set up such a trap." He did not really resent the cultivators of Xianyu Palace, but he did not know how he would explain to his master if it was all for naught in the end. Zhang Yan smiled. This is human nature. Of course, one would not want to let others take away something that belongs to one's family. However, I guess there is most likely something good hidden down there. Even if we can't find the fur, we can use it to make up for the people who came later. Han Zhuqing could not help but nod. He looked at the mountain peak. It was actually not eye-catching, and the spiritual opportunity was extremely restrained. It happened to be south of the Great Lake of Longyuan, outside the range of the Qinsong School's Mountain Gate Formation. No cultivators dared to set up a sect here, so there was no one around, only some birds and beasts lived here. He thought about it for a moment. When his teacher took back the mountain, all the creatures in the mountain would suffer for no reason. He took out a bamboo flute and blew it a few times. Immediately, all the insects and birds in the mountain were frightened. They all scurried out and fled into the depths of the dense forest in the distance. Zhang Yan only watched from the side and did not stop them. When there was no more movement in the mountain, he said calmly, "There's no point in you doing this. Even if you drive away these animals, there are still countless tiny living creatures in the mountain." Han Zhuqing sighed. "I know, but since I can't see them, I can only pretend that they're not here. I just hope that my heart is clear." Zhang Yan did not comment. He waved his sleeve, and a ray of water light rushed down and absorbed the entire mountain peak, leaving only a deep pit. He said, "You've done well this time. I know that you're not interested in cultivation, but in exotic animals. Why don't you go down and take a look? You might find something." Han Zhuqing thought of what Zhang Yan had just said, and his expression changed. He clasped his hands in front of his chest, and after a while, he came back with an object in his arms. He held it out and said, "Benevolent master, this is the only thing in the room. It's just that this disciple's knowledge is shallow and does not know what it is." Zhang Yan took a look and saw that it was a square jade stone. The edges were very neat, as if it was cut by a sword, and he could not sense any abnormalities. A thought flashed across his mind, and he raised his finger to touch it. After a while, he smiled and said, "There is a living creature sealed inside, but the method is brilliant. If I didn't look carefully, I wouldn't have been able to detect it." Han Zhuqing's eyes widened and he said, "A living thing? Could it be?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You don't have to make wild guesses before the seal is removed. This isn't a place to talk. We can talk when we get back." As soon as he finished speaking, he rolled up his sleeve, and in the next moment, the master and disciple had returned to the Duzhen Hall. After sitting down on the jade platform, he placed the jade stone on it, and then he flicked his finger. A light cracking sound was heard, and the jade stone shattered to reveal the thing inside. Chapter 1148. After the jade piece split open, there was a curled-up green branch inside. The branch was young and slender, but there was a large fruit bud hanging at the front. It looked heavy and bent over the branch, as if it had reached a ripe and plump state. Han Zhuqing was a little stunned. Although this thing was alive, it was not a living thing as he imagined. He took 2 steps forward and said, "Master, this is..." Zhang Yan took a few glances and shifted his gaze to the jade piece. He saw many tiny tadpole-like words on the inner wall, and guessed that it was related to this thing. He reached out and pointed, and the pieces gathered together as if they had never been broken. He glanced down and smiled. He said, "This Xianyu Palace is quite ingenious to come up with such an item." He flicked his sleeve and handed it to Han Zhuqing. "Take a look and you'll know the origins of this item." Han Zhuqing carefully took the jade piece, but the more he looked at it, the more surprised he became. Finally, he looked at the fruit on the green branch and said in disbelief, "This thing is actually a living thing that was born from the essence of plants?" There were many living things born from the essence of plants in the world, but this was different. Xianyu Palace was thinking about how to grow a demonic fetus with the essence of plants. However, it was not easy. The cultivators of the palace studied it for thousands of years, but they only managed to produce this one, and it still needed the spiritual vigor from the left Freedom Bird King's fur to nourish it. Zhang Yan replied, "That's not strange at all. There are millions and millions of worlds in the void sky, and there are many things that have never been heard of or seen before. Being trapped in a world like this, we are merely looking at the sky from the bottom of a well. Only by living a long life and wielding divine abilities can we roam the world, be free and unfettered, and experience that wondrous realm." Han Zhuqing lowered his head in shame and said, "I've really let you down, master." Zhang Yan looked at him and said with a smile, "I don't need to tell you this, you know it too. However, you just want to enjoy the days before you, so you don't want to pursue the illusory path of longevity. That's why you don't want to pursue the illusory path of immortality. There's nothing wrong with that. The path is chosen by yourself. As long as you have a clear conscience, it's fine. You don't have to care about anything else." Han Zhuqing felt relieved when he heard that. Nodding his head, he raised his head and said, "Yes, master." Zhang Yan turned to look at the green branch and said, "This thing looks like it's about to mature. It's just that it's trapped in the jade and hasn't been born yet. However, this kind of creation created by human hands, whether or not the world can tolerate it will depend on its own luck." While speaking, there seemed to be some movement inside, and both of them could sense that there was a young creature slowly struggling inside. However, the fruit shell was tough, and it was unable to break out. However, under the exertion of force, the fruit bud gradually shook, and at this point, it could no longer bear it. With a crisp sound, it fell to the ground. It first smashed onto the table, then rolled onto the ground. Right at this moment, the sound of a fruit cracking could be heard, and a white little beast arched out from within. Its body was round, and there was a short horn on its mouth. It looked like a young rhinoceros. However, it seemed to be afraid of light, and its eyes were unable to open. It tried to stand up several times, but to no avail. It could only moo as if it was asking for help. Because it was not far from Han Zhuqing's feet, he hesitated for a moment, then bent down to pick it up. After carefully examining it, he said, "Master, this beast seems to be the legendary golden-footed rhinoceros." Zhang Yan said, "It only looks similar. As for what it really is, it's hard to tell. You can handle it yourself." Han Zhuqing said happily, "Thank you, master." Zhang Yan smiled, "You've given me the king bird's fur this time, so it's considered a merit. If you only give me this, it'll be too unfair." He shifted his gaze, and Jingyu, who was standing at the side, immediately came up and bowed. "Master, what instructions do you have?" Zhang Yan said, "Bring Zhuqing to the storage in the hall. Whatever he likes, let him take it." Jingyu acknowledged. Han Zhuqing hurriedly prostrated on the ground to thank him. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Go." After his disciple left, he picked up the jade piece again and looked at it carefully. His eyes flickered as if he was thinking about something. Finally, he rolled up his sleeves and kept all the jade pieces on the table. Then, he rode a ray of light and headed towards the Xuanzisi realm. When he reached the center of the world, he went to a towering mountain peak and stood still. He circulated his mana and heard the rumbling sound of water. A ray of water light flashed in front of him and the mountain peak was released again. With a flick of his sleeve, all the water, grass, and trees on it were removed, and the piece of fur below was flattened. Very quickly, it covered the sea within a radius of 1,000 miles. Although it was in the water, it floated and did not sink like a floating island. Although tens of thousands of years had passed, the entire fur looked colorful, and the feathers were unusually gorgeous. He could clearly see that although this piece of fur was very large, it was unknown whether it was because it was magical or because Xinyu Palace had used some method, but after so many years, it was still exuding vitality. According to the rumors, as long as one wore this King Zhuqing's skin on their body, cultivators could use it to travel in the void. However, he was very clear that this should be a false rumor, or a story made up by a low-level cultivator who did not know the inside story. The left fairy kingbird was able to fly through space, and this was a divine ability bestowed by the heavens. However, without a head, a body, a pair of wings, and claws, Wanting to accomplish this by relying on a mere piece of fur was undoubtedly wishful thinking. If it was really possible, it would have been seized by the ancient cultivators a long time ago. How could it have been left behind until now? Although this item was huge, it was only useful to a grotto heaven cultivator like him in the middle. It was about 10 feet in size, and it was the part of the fur where the essence and vitality gathered the most. He focused his gaze for a moment, and a sword gleam flew out from between his brows. With a stream of light, it circled around and chopped off the piece of fur in the middle. He then used his mana and it floated to his front. He touched it, and he felt that the big feather was unusually soft and smooth. The spiritual vigor inside was unusually abundant. He thought to himself, the vitality is so strong, like a blazing fire. No wonder the green branch could survive. When he heard about this item earlier, he had some ideas on how to use it. However, after reading the description in the jade slip, he had another idea. It recorded that Xianyu Palace had spent thousands of years creating a blood refinement technique known as the living refinement art. This method was to take the limbs and bones of spiritual birds and strange beasts and fuse them into one. It was then used to refine all kinds of ferocious and strange beasts in the ancient legends. There were even many things that only existed in the imagination of mortals and did not exist in the world. However, this technique was useful more than 10,000 years ago. At that time, there were many different kinds of big demons, and living medicine was easy to find. Hence, the power of the magic treasure that was refined was naturally great. However, the fate had changed now. Even if it could be refined, it could only be used by cultivators who had entered the Yuanying state. Even if it took a lot of effort to refine it, it might not be comparable to an ordinary magic treasure. It was even more worthless to a grotto heaven cultivator. What Zhang Yan was thinking about now was whether he should use this living refining technique to refine the kingbird's fur. If he only had this piece of fur, it would not be of much use. However, don't forget that he had killed a few sky demons and obtained many good things. Other than a few that he had given away, most of them were still in his hands. He raised his sleeve and several items floated in front of him. The most eye-catching among them were the 9 origin beads. This item could be said to be infinitely powerful when he was in the Yuanying state. When he used all of it, it was simply unstoppable. However, when he was in the image phase state, it was useless. Even if he could hit the Dharma form of a person in the grotto heaven, it would at most break a corner. It was really not of much use to the spiritual qi that spread thousands of miles. It was just that he had not decided how to deal with it. If he could make use of it this time, he might be able to refine a suitable magic treasure. According to the records of the Xianyu Palace, if he wanted to fuse these items together and finally refine them into a magic treasure, he would first need to entrust his divine will to an item. This could be a strange demon that existed in the world, or it could be a monster that had never appeared before and only existed in legends. However, this kind of divine will was not done carelessly. It had to be paid attention to. If the chosen beast was too weak, it would not have much potential and would not be of much help. However, if it was too strong and ferocious, it would only be a waste of precious materials, and it would not be refined no matter what. Previously, Zhang Yan already had a choice in his heart. There was a ferocious beast in ancient times known as Devour. This was a legendary monster that had 100 eyes and 1,000 feet. Its eyes were all located on its back. When it lay on the ground, it would fall into a deep slumber. It could transform into mountains, lakes, fertile fields, and attract hundreds of spirits to gather. When it woke up, tens of thousands of years would have passed. At that time, it would only need to roll up and it would be able to devour all living things on its body. As for Devour, it had a child called Jie. Its size could change. It was like a kite that could fly between heaven and earth and kill all kinds of spiritual plants. It was extremely ferocious. He planned to use this item as divine will and trust. If he had better precious materials in the future, he might be able to further refine it into a ferocious creature like Devour. The Xianyu Palace's sacrificial art only focuses on precious materials. The technique is not complicated, but from what I see now, it seems a little crude. Even when I'm refining, I don't have to wait by the side all the time. However, the spiritual opportunity of heaven and earth has changed over tens of thousands of years. If I don't change and follow the original method, I'm afraid there might be a mistake. I should try a few times first. When he thought of this, Zhang Yan suppressed the thought of immediately refining. He waved his sleeves and kept all the items in front of him, including the fur. He then flew into the sky and arrived at the main hall. Not long after he sat down, the formation spirit walked up and said, "Master, just now, there's a letter from Donghai. Since you're not here, I'll accept it." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "A letter from Donghai. It might be that Tao Jinren has come out of seclusion." He ordered the formation spirit to take a look. As expected, it was from Tao Jinren. The letter mentioned that he had already refined the Chua Dragon's soul essence. The formation plate outside South Cliff Continent also stood up and asked if he wanted to continue with the operation. He thought for a while. The opening tribulation was not far away, so it was not suitable for him to move. Just when he was about to reply, he suddenly thought of something. This living refining art is passed down by Xianyu Palace. It has a deep relationship with Nanhua sect. Tao Jinren originally came from this sect. I might as well look for him and discuss it. It might be beneficial. Chapter 1149. Tao Jinren stood in front of the psychic jade wall. When Zhang Yan's figure slowly appeared, he bowed and said, "Greetings, Jinren Zhang." Zhang Yan returned the greeting and chatted with him for a while before saying, "I received your letter, but the situation has changed slightly. In these few years, Tao Jinren, fellow Taoist me, and fellow Taoist Li only need to accumulate their cultivation. I can ask fellow Taoist Li to conceal the array formation plate on the sea. During this period of time, you only need to hide, and there is no need to make things difficult for Yu Xiao." Tao Jinren's expression changed slightly. He could naturally understand the deeper meaning in the words, and he said in a deep voice, "I understand." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and stopped talking about this matter. He changed the topic. "I wonder if Jinren has sacrificially refined the soul of the Hui dragon?" Tao Jinren replied, "I have already stored it in the beast tracking chart. With this item, if I fight against an opponent like Wu Riyang, I should not be at a disadvantage." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Then congratulations, fellow Taoist." At this point, he paused and said, "Recently, I have obtained a living refining technique. It was left behind in the ancient Xianyu Palace. I have several treasures here, and I am preparing to sacrifice and refine them. However, after all, I am not a cultivator of this sect. Thinking that Tao Jinren has some history with it, I would like to ask Jinren to take a look." "Xianyu Palace?" Tao Jinren couldn't help but nod and said, "I would very much like to take a look." The cultivators of Nanhua sect actually never mentioned that they once had such an upper sect, and they destroyed everything related to Xianyu Palace. At least in Donghua continent, it was very difficult to find traces of this sect. However, the sourcebook of Walking Beast diagram and the general Imperial Spirit Birds chart were passed down from the Xianyu Palace. The person in charge of the diagram couldn't turn a blind eye to it. When the Walking Beast diagram was passed on to Tao Jinren, he just now knew the name of this sect. Later on, he broke out of the sect and met more and more people. He also visited many ancient ruins, which was why he had some understanding of this sect. After all, they were of the same lineage, and he also wanted to explore the secret techniques of this sect. Zhang Yan raised his hand. Lines of words appeared on the psychic jade wall. It was the refinement method. Tao Jinren looked over, and after he finished reading, he said, "Fantastic thinking. Taoist Yang, are you going to use this technique to refine a spiritual item?" Zhang Yan, "That is indeed my intention." Tao Jinren said, "It's a pity that this path is already very difficult." Judging from the technique above, it was easy for him to imitate it, but the living medicine was not easy to obtain. Moreover, the crux of the living refinement technique was the object that was entrusted to it. If he did not choose well, the possibility of failure was very high. Zhang Yan knew what he was thinking and said with a smile, Tao Zhenren should know that I have many heavenly demon shell remnants in my hands. Moreover, I have obtained the fur of a left freedom kingbird, which can be used as a carrier. Tao Zhenren was also surprised. Could it be the left freedom kingbird that crossed the sky 10,000 years ago? Zhang Yan said, "It is the kingbird that was killed by Taoist Hongho." Tao Zhenren thought for a while and said, "I heard that the left freedom kingbird's fur is magical and full of vitality. When it reaches any world, it can slowly adapt to that world. If there really is such an item, it can be used to unify many treasures." Zhang Yan said, "But I think that the incantation used 10,000 years ago should be used carefully. We cannot use it the same way, and it needs to change according to the times." Tao Zhenren agreed. Taoist Zhang's concern is not unreasonable. He thought for a while and said, "What I have learned previously is somewhat compatible with this Tao. Taoist Zhang, why don't you tell me the treasures that you need to refine into it? After I go into seclusion for a few days, I hope I can find the method to unify it." Zhang Yan thought for a while and felt that it was a good idea. After all, in this aspect, Tao Zhenren was the expert, so he bowed and said, "Then I will have to trouble Taoist Zhang." Tao Zhenren said that he did not dare and said, "In about 7 or 8 days, I will have a definite answer." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Then after 10 days, I will discuss it with Tao Zhenren." He withdrew his spirit from the jade disc and sat for a while. Then he flew out of the Xuanzi ocean world and into the sky, stepping into the azure sky hall. The manager here, Su Su, sensed her master's arrival and immediately led a group of servants to welcome him. Zhang Yan said, "All of you go do what you need to do. I am only stopping here for a while. I will leave after a while." Su Su nodded and led the crowd away. Zhang Yan looked up at the sky and looked around. After more than 2 hours, his eyes were fixed on one place. Then he leaped up and turned into a ray of light that traveled into the void. This time, he released his mana and used his sword light to travel. After half a day, he arrived in front of a large cauldron. Back then, Fu Baoxing and Wang Kaiwei were ordered by him to kill the disciples of the Shenin Palace in the void. After this cauldron was destroyed, it had been floating in the sky. However, he did not come to see if there were any demons occupying this place, but to test the power of the divine water forbidden light in his hand. Therefore, the power of the light was so great that he could not really practice it in the 9 continents or in the small worlds. Only here, where he was surrounded by boundless space, he did not have to worry about anything. When he got closer, he touched the center of his brows. An illusory and dazzling light surged out and quickly turned into a ray of light that circled around his body. The head and the tail of the light entered the void, and he could not see where it ended. With a thought, the light flashed and went above the palace cauldron. In the blink of an eye, it entered. At first, there was nothing strange, but after a while, the entire palace cauldron silently shattered into countless pieces, and each piece was no bigger than a palm. However, this was not the end. All the pieces turned into fine dust in a few breaths' time and finally dissipated into the void. The divine light flashed again and returned to its original place, still circling around his body. He checked a little and found that the divine light was less than half of the original. However, this palace cauldron was not easy to destroy. It could survive in the void until now and was not damaged by the poisonous fire and strong wind of the sky for at least 10,000 years. One could imagine how strong it was. Even if he attacked with all his strength, he could not do it in such a short time, which showed the destructive power of the divine light. After this test, he already knew in his heart that when he fought in the future, as long as he used the divine light to attack with all his strength, even a Taoist Wonderland master with a protective treasure might not be able to withstand it. If he was lucky, he might be able to break the Dharma on the spot and kill the opponent. As for the half that was lost this time, it was not a problem. This water had spirituality. As long as the root was not damaged, it would be able to replenish itself with spiritual opportunity when he returned. If he urged it, the speed of replenishment would be faster. With a thought, he kept the divine light back into the center of his brows and rode the sword back to the 9 continents. This time, he did not rush forward like when he came. It took him almost a day to return to the Duzhen Hall. He sat on the jade couch and slowly recovered the mana that was lost during the trip to the void. When his divine chi was full, he took out the talismans that were refined by the elders on duty. With the guidance of his mana, one of them floated up gently. With a flick of his finger, he hit a spell on it. Suddenly, there was the sound of a bell on the talisman, and a magnificent fire floated up. The original apricot yellow talisman gradually turned into a greasy white color under the calcination. He casually grabbed a spiritual opportunity and pressed it on the talisman. There seemed to be starlight overflowing from it. It was dazzling and beautiful like the sunset. It was very pleasing to the eye. After about 3 days, the talisman was finally refined, and it fell onto the table with a clatter. It had actually transformed into a jade talisman. Zhang Yan looked at it, and the jade talisman turned into a light and flew into his sleeve. There were more than 100 of them. It would take about a year to refine all of them. However, compared to the effect of the talisman in battle, the effort was worth it. He continued to refine the talisman, and soon, it was the appointed time. He closed his eyes and sat down to communicate with the spiritual opportunity. The psychic jade wall in the small world of East Sea started to shake gently. Tao Jinren was near the altar. He felt the movement and walked over. He injected mana into the jade wall, and the psychic jade wall lit up. Zhang Yan raised his hand and smiled. Tao Jinren, have you learned anything these few days? Tao Jinren replied politely, after these few days of enlightenment, based on the wisdom of the predecessors, I have come up with a suitable sacrificial method. Jinren can take a look. I wrote it in a hurry and there might be some omissions. If Jinren sees it, please do not hesitate to correct me. He took out a silk book from his sleeve and opened it in front of the psychic jade wall. Zhang Yan glanced at it and noticed that compared to before, this sacrificial refinement technique hadn't changed much, but quite a lot of external medicines had been added. They weren't living medicines, but some things condensed from vital energy. Tao Jinren explained, all the external medicines are mostly obtained from the sky demon. Although they are not as good as the left freedom king bird, they are not far from each other. They can be combined and refined at the same place. However, this sacrificial method has not reached the stage of turning the dead into life. It is using the original vitality and spirituality of the living medicine. Some of the parts that should be bridging chi and walking back and forth are too stiff. It is only relying on the strong spiritual vigor of heaven and earth to force it. Therefore, I have used hundreds of external medicines to guide and adjust it. It should be much smoother. Zhang Yan nodded and looked away. He said, thank you for your trouble, Tao Jinren. Tao Jinren bowed slightly and said, Jinren is too polite. However, I have to remind you that even if the spiritual item is refined, it is not naturally produced. I am afraid it will not be tolerated by heaven and earth. It can only be used for a while and not for a long time. Zhang Yan thought for a while and asked, Jinren, how long do you think it can live in this world if it is refined according to this method? Tao Jinren said, I privately speculate that if it is not used normally and left to fend for itself, it can live for 200 to 300 years. However, if it is used in battle, it can only live for half a year at most. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, that's enough. He did not care about this. Once the tribulation of man began, he would definitely face the most dangerous battle since he entered Tao. As long as he could get through it, he was willing to give up all the external things he had. When the situation was settled, or when he went to another world, what treasures could he not find? If he could not get through it, he would die in the end. What was the use of saving these things? Now he had to use all the means to turn all the treasures and external medicines that he could use into help. As for how long he could use it, there was no need to think about it. Chapter 1150. Time flew by. It had been 10 years since Zhang Yan obtained the left freedom kingbird's fur. Over the years, according to the secret method he discussed with spiritual master Tao, he used 2 hours a day to refine this item, and the rest of the time was used to hone his magic power and nurture the magic treasure. In the main hall, he sat cross-legged on the jade couch. In front of him was a soil platform. It was slightly suspended in the air and was only a finger away from the ground. It was not bigger than an arm's length, but it was as tall as a person. It was hollowed out and filled with the deep abyss heavy water. This platform was built with the imperial soil. This soil was nourished by the spiritual vigor of the heaven and earth for billions of years. As long as there was a spiritual formation carved on it and mana was added, it could float in the sky. In ancient times, the flying mountains and floating islands were mostly supported by this soil. However, as the spiritual vigor of the heaven and earth deteriorated, this strange soil was used too much in the past. Now, there was not much left. Even in the Hall of Du Zhen, there was only this much. This was the only thing that could support such a heavy load of water. It was not supported by the palace's prohibition. After Zhang Yan channeled his mana for a long time, he flipped his palm and channeled his mana. The water slowly floated out from the soil platform and towards his palm. As the water increased, it slowly rotated and floated upwards. It was just a line of water, but it actually made the sound of surging waves. This deep abyss heavy water was fine when it was not moving, but when it rotated, it was so powerful that almost nothing could get close. Even the light in the world seemed to be swallowed by it. The water quickly reached a height of 100 feet, but it did not disperse. The clouds above were long gone. Even the cloud dragons that were patrolling in the hall avoided it and did not dare to get close. After channeling his mana for half a day, even Zhang Yan felt that his mana was running out. In the past, when he fought with cultivators of the same generation for such a long time, he did not use up so much mana. This showed how difficult it was to control this heavy water. After channeling for another 2 hours, he just now slowly stopped and put the water back into the soil platform. He thought, although this will help me a lot in training my martial arts, it is still not enough. Even if I train for another 10 or 20 years, I won't be able to do it. Now that I'm familiar with the water, I can try to enter the water to cultivate. If I can hold on for a while, I'll be able to cultivate. In that case, it won't be long before I break through the 7th barrier. The heavy water was too heavy. Once a cultivator entered the water, their entire body would be under the pressure of the water. Even Taoist Heavenly Abode's magic power was slightly weaker. Immediately, his conjured body collapsed, and his flesh and bones turned into mud. But he did not only cultivate Chi Path, his Strength Path was also at rank 6. With his body and his previous training, he could resist this water power. He calmed his mind and began to regulate his breathing. Half a month later, he was able to sit down and meditate. At this moment, his essence, Qi, and dermic powers were completely restored. Thus, he stepped on the void and arrived at the top of the earth platform. Looking at the pool of heavy water below, he slowly sank into it. He focused on cultivating his magic power here and did not care about anything else. Soon, 5 years passed. On this day, Jingyu came to the front of the soil platform and reported, "Master, a child came to the hall. He said he brought a decree from Sect Master." Zhang Yan slowly stood up from the heavy water. Water droplets rolled down his robe. He waited until he was completely out of the water before saying, "Call him here." Jingyu received the order and left. Not long later, a child came to the hall and bowed. "Greetings, Hall Master Ji Zhen." Zhang Yan said, "What is the purpose of Sect Master's decree?" The boy hurriedly took out the decree. Zhang Yan used his magic power to take the decree and opened it. His gaze flickered slightly and he nodded. "Go back and tell Sect Master that I already know about this. Say that I already know about this." The child lowered his head and said, "Then I will take my leave." As he said this, he bowed and left. Zhang Yan shook his sleeve, and the decree turned into ashes, leaving only a jade tablet in his hand. He kept it and was about to sit down to regulate his breathing, but right at this moment, he suddenly felt something strange and turned his head to look in the direction of the side hall. Ever since Ning Chongxian, the palace lord of the side hall, entered this world, there had been qi activity leaking out and sword qi overflowed. For so many years, it had never stopped. However, just now, the qi activity suddenly weakened, as if it was about to be cut off. Even Jingyu also noticed the abnormality and said, "Master, is this a sign of insufficient spiritual vigor?" Usually, When a cultivator was approaching the gate of the grotto heaven, there would be a period of qi activity rising. If it was smooth and the preparation was sufficient, then there would be a great chance to cross over in one go. But if there was not enough momentum, then before he could really touch the gate, he would have already lost his hope. Zhang Yan's magic power was the strongest among his peers. That was why he did not have any difficulties when he was here in the past. At this moment he sensed a little and thought for a while. He said, "This is not a lack of spiritual vigor, but a method to suppress it first and then release it later." What Hall Master Ning cultivated is the 1,000 Cloud Snatch Sword scripture. This method is different from other methods, so you should have this experience. The former Hall Master of the Hall of Purity Truth, Zhui Yuming, cultivated the 1,000 Cloud Snatch Sword scripture. He had left behind many insights. He also roughly flipped through it and knew that after cultivating this method, if one reached the gate of the grotto heaven, then the sword qi on one's body would always be spreading out and robbing the spiritual vigor of the outside world to continuously replenish the loss. At this time, what one needed to do was not to move forward bravely, but to suppress the qi activity and even weaken it on its own. Only by doing this repeatedly could one achieve success. But this step was easy to say, but it was extremely difficult to do. In the past years of Qinsong School, there were many talented cultivators who stopped at this gate and could not take a peek at the higher level of cultivation. Looking at the current situation, not only was it not a bad thing, but it was also smooth sailing. But after that, there would be a series of twists and turns, which was equally dangerous. And this kind of thing could only be done by the cultivator himself. Outsiders could not interfere. He retracted his gaze, sat with his legs crossed, and went into meditation. After only one day, his mana was fully recovered. He stood up, turned into a clear light, and flew out of the small world. He came to the outer hall, took out the jade tablet and waved it, and a formation door opened in front of him. He did not hesitate and stepped in. In the blink of an eye, he was in a small world. In front of him was a quiet valley. Everywhere there were cicadas singing and birds chirping. A clear mountain spring flowed from high up, and on the other side of the river, there was a hut. In front of the door, there were several green bamboos. At this time, there was a young man lying on a blue stone by the river, but when Zhang Yan looked over, he suddenly shuddered and rolled down from the rock. When he got up and saw Zhang Yan, he was shocked at first, then he was overjoyed and shouted into the hut, "Grandmaster, someone from Qinsong School is here." A voice came from the hut, "Don't shout, I already know." A middle-aged cultivator walked out. He was wearing a brocade robe and a jade belt around his waist. It was Gan Shouting, who came from Dongxing State. He bowed and said, "So it's Xinren Zhang, I'm sorry for not going out to meet you." Zhang Yan smiled and returned the bow. "Xinren Gan, you are too polite." Gan Shouting said, "Xinren Zhang, you must have something to teach, then please come inside to talk." He then told the disciple, "Go and invite Xinren Ji here." The disciple bowed and flew away. Zhang Yan followed Gan Shouting to the hut and sat down. When the servant served tea, he asked, "How are the two of you staying here?" Gan Shouting said, "The spiritual vigor here is abundant, far better than my dilapidated cave abode. The two of us have cultivated here, and our skills have improved a lot." Zhang Yan said, "That's good." Gan Shouting looked at him and said, "Although the scenery here is good, I have not returned to my sect for a long time, I miss it." Zhang Yan smiled and took a sip of tea before bluntly saying, "Since I've invited you two here, I won't let you go so easily. I'm sure fellow Taoist Gan is aware of this." Gan Shouting, on the other hand, was not annoyed. He was just a little surprised. He pondered for a moment before cupping his fists and saying, "Enlightened Zhang, may I be so bold as to ask you a question? Restraining us here and not allowing us to leave, is it to make things easier for the Deep Abyss sect? If that's the case, the two of us can make a solemn vow that when we return, we will only guard our own mountains and will not come out to fight with your sect." Zhang Yan shook his head. Gan Shouting thought for a while and said, "If Xinren Zhang thinks that it's inappropriate, then the two of us are willing to leave Dongxing State and live on the sea. As long as your sect is still in Dongxing, we will not return." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, Zhenren, you don't have to test me. Why would I invite the two of you here for such a small matter? Gan Shouting thought for a while and said, then what is your sect's intention? Can you tell me so that I can have an idea? Zhang Yan looked over and said, I invited the two of you here to do something for my Qinsong school. Gan Shouting's heart skipped a beat. He smiled bitterly and said, we are ashamed. The two of us are much weaker than the Zhenren of your sect. How can we help your sect? Zhang Yan raised his hand and pointed outside. He said, Taoist friend, you should know that because there are more and more cultivators in this world, the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth is weakening day by day. If this continues, there will be a day when there will be a great disaster, just like the West continent in the past. Gan Shouting felt even more uneasy. He lowered his head and thought for a while. He said, that's true, but forgive me for being blunt. Even when that time comes, I'm afraid that Taoist Ji and I will be long dead. What will happen in the future have to do with us? Zhang Yan laughed and said, what will happen in the future? The disaster is already right in front of us. How can there be any future? When Gan Shouting heard this, his body shuddered and he looked at him in disbelief. Zhang Yan stood up and walked to the door. He said, even if I let the two of you go, do the two of you think that you will be safe after hiding in Dongxing State? If that's true, then everyone can avoid the disaster by hiding there. From the moment the two of you enter Dao, you are already in the disaster. Whether you are willing or not, you can't escape it. Chapter 1151. P.S. There was a typo yesterday. It was the 5th transformation of the strength path, not the 6th transformation. Thank you for pointing it out. Gan Shouting sat there for a long time and said dryly, I understand now. You want us to enter your sect's formation and face the calamity together. Is that right? When he came to the Donghua continent, he knew that this was not the Dongxing continent. Every major sect had several people from the heavenly abode in charge. Even though the Yutsong sect was one of the best in terms of ability, once people like them got involved, they would definitely die. Zhang Yan turned around and said, Zhenren Gan, my sect does not want you to fight against the truth path. I have something else to ask of you. Gan Shouting's heart was heavy. Qinsong school had imprisoned them for so many years. What they wanted to do was definitely not simple. Zhang Yan said, Zhenren Ji is not here yet. I will tell you when he arrives. The small world was vast. Ji Xiangping was not willing to stay in such a secluded place. He went to the seaside alone. When he arrived, it was already several hours later. After greeting each other in the hut, he sat down. After exchanging a few words with Gan Shouting, Ji Xiangping roughly understood the purpose of Zhang Yan's visit. He said, since I'm already here, there's no need to beat around the bush about your esteemed sect's plans. Please speak plainly. Zhang Yan's gaze suddenly became profound. He looked at the two and said slowly, my Qinsong school intends to dig up the roots of the earth and seize the qi of the earth. What? The two had cultivated for more than 2,000 years. But when they heard this, they could not hold it in anymore. They stood up at the same time, their expressions filled with disbelief. Ji Xiangping said with a trembling voice, the spiritual opportunity of the 9 continents originates from the roots of the earth. Is your sect not afraid of becoming enemies with all the cultivators in the world by doing this? Zhang Yan smiled indifferently and said, it is not to the extent of becoming enemies with all the cultivators in the world. My Qinsong school is doing this because we have allies. We will advance and retreat together. Seeing how calm he was, the two of them slowly calmed down after their initial shock. Gan Shouting stared at him. He said in a deep voice, then why is your esteemed sect doing this? Was it because there was not enough spiritual opportunity in the world? But I see that your sect has an empty spiritual cave, at least the spiritual vigor of a continent. It seems that there is no need to do so now. There was fighting spirit in Zhang Yan's eyes as he said in a sonorous voice, if we allow this world to continue to deteriorate like this, there will be a big change sooner or later. At that time, we can only sit back and watch others make a move. Rather than passively facing the calamity, we might as well take the initiative to make a move and open up a new world. The two of them were shocked by his words, and they couldn't help but take 2 steps back. At the same time, their hearts were filled with complicated thoughts, and they actually stood there speechless for a long time. After a long time, Gan Shouting cupped his hands and said, "Zhenrenzhang, I still don't understand. Does that mean that your esteemed sect has moved the Earth's roots and extracted the Earth's energy to alleviate the crisis? Isn't this like drinking poison to quench thirst?" Zhang Yan said, "There is naturally a reason for this. But don't worry, my Qinsong school won't seek its own death for no reason. When the time is right, I will definitely give you an explanation." The explanation he gave was also to make the two of them more obedient. As for what exactly he would do, there was no need to explain it to them now. Gan Shouting and Jiunshu actually regretted what they heard. Now they couldn't say no even if they wanted to. They were very clear that if they dared to say no now, they would probably end up badly. Gan Shouting sighed heavily. He said, "Then what does your esteemed sect want us to do?" Zhang Yan said, "Nothing else. Please go to the Earth's roots and extract the Earth's energy. The rest of the matter has nothing to do with the two of you. When the time comes, it is up to you whether you want to leave or stay." The two of them had already sorted out their thoughts. After hearing this, they were not that agitated anymore. Gan Shouting smiled bitterly, "Your esteemed sect thinks too highly of the two of us. Although I am not knowledgeable, I know that the Earth's roots are extremely deep underground. On the outside, it is covered by the Hunyuan Earth barrier. There is also the origin magnetic true power that disrupts the spiritual vigor. With our mana, I'm afraid we can't do it no matter what." Zhang Yan said, "You don't have to worry about this. If the two of you agree, my Qinsong school will naturally have a way to help the two of you. I only have one question, are you willing or not?" The two of them did not speak. The hut instantly fell into silence. Zhang Yan did not rush them. He only waited quietly at the side. After a long time, the two of them seemed to have finally made a decision. Gan Shouting took a step forward and bowed deeply to him. Half probing and half pleading, he said, "Since your esteemed sect thinks highly of me and fellow Ji, then we shall not refuse. We are willing to accept this matter. However, if anything unforeseen happens, I hope that your esteemed sect can take care of our mountain sections." Zhang Yan shook his sleeve. A jade token floated into midair. In a split second, it emitted a ray of light that was several feet long. A formation door was opened. Then, a contract flew out from the inside and landed on the table. He pointed and said, "The two of you only need to sign this contract. Then you are one of us. The sect behind you is also my Qinsong school's ally. It is reasonable for us to take care of you. The two of you need not worry." Gan and Ji saw that he was pressing on and did not give them any chance to think. They were helpless. Seeing that there was no way out, they could only walk forward and pick up the contract to take a look. Unexpectedly, it was not harsh. Instead, it was very generous. It promised that as long as the matter was successful, it would guarantee the safety of the two of them. After the two of them finished reading, they looked at each other. Then they took a strand of their soul and life essence. They turned their qi into a seal and engraved it on the contract. Once the contract was formed, it instantly turned into 3 rays of light. 2 of them flew into the space between their eyebrows. The last one returned to the formation door. Seeing that the purpose of his visit had been achieved, Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There are still many details that need to be sorted out in this matter. However, there is no need to rush. Someone will come another day to discuss in detail with the two of you. I will take my leave now." Gan and Ji hurriedly bowed and said, "Zhenrenzhang, take care." Zhang Yan nodded. He pushed the jade token and turned to walk into the formation door. Very quickly, he disappeared with the door. After he left, Gan Shouting let out a long sigh and said, "This time, we are tied together with Qinsong School." Ji Xiangping's expression darkened. She said with some irritation, "There are so many people in Qinsong School. They don't want to do this themselves, but they want us to do it. Can't you see the meaning behind this?" Gan Shouting shook his head and said, "So what? If we don't act according to Qinsong School's wishes, I believe they will attack us to prevent the news from leaking. At that time, even our souls will be hard to protect. If we take this path, at least we have a chance of survival. Ji Xiangping snorted and said, I want to know, if we really refuse just now, will Qinsong School dare to start a war with us here? Aren't they afraid of destroying the mountain gate? Gan Shouting sighed and said, if Qinsong School dares to tell us about this, they must be prepared. Besides, the contract has already been signed, what else can they do? Now, we can only hope that they can succeed. After Zhang Yan passed through the formation door, he came to the Supreme Hall. Qi Yuntian was already standing on the stairs waiting for him. When he saw him, he bowed and said, Junior brother Zhang is here. Zhang Yan returned the greeting. He looked around and saw 9 jade pillars erected in the middle of the hall. They were as thick as the hall's pillars. They were about 3 feet high, pure white and flawless. There was no spiritual vigor leaking out from them. He took 2 steps forward and said, is this the 9 Qian determining pillars? Qi Yuntan also walked down and said, yes, it is. My teacher once said that 100 years after sect Master Jinren ascended to the position, he started to sacrificial refine this item. In these hundreds of years, he has refined more than 30 pillars. However, only these 9 pillars are the most useful. With this item, even an ordinary grotto heaven cultivator can break through the Hunyuan earth barrier and enter the earth aperture. Zhang Yan nodded. The sacrificial refining method of this pillar was originally passed down in the West continent. At that time, due to the gradual decline of spiritual vigor in the 3 continents, a few sects secretly built this pillar to absorb the earth qi. At first, no one noticed anything unusual. When the sects realized that something was wrong, it was already too late. This directly led to a battle. Fortunately, at that time, there was still a way out, so everyone did not end up dying together. But now, there was no way out. He retracted his gaze and turned his head and said, the 2 of them signed the contract today. I think they are still not satisfied. We shouldn't force them too much. Let's wait for a few days and then send someone to send it over. Qi Yuntian thought for a while and nodded, let's do as junior brother says. Zhang Yan and Qi Yuntian discussed for half an hour and then came out from the upper extreme hall. However, he did not return to the Duzhen hall. Instead, he rushed to the Qing Tian hall. When he came to the door of the hall, he waved away the servants who were waiting outside and walked in. As soon as he entered the inner room, he saw a prismatic object on the jade platform in front of him. Its body was extremely flat, about 10 feet wide. The fur on its body was bright and smooth, but in the middle, there was a black profound mark, as if someone had drawn it with a brush. If someone who didn't know the details saw it, they would only think it was a soft blanket, but from its slight breathing, they could see that it was a living creature, but they couldn't tell where its head was. This was the vicious object that he had refined using the living refining technique. Although he had entrusted it with his divine will, it was hard to know what it would look like in the end, and what kind of abilities it would have. He could only wait for it to be refined. Just now, he could find out. And now, he was not far from that step. He walked forward and put his hand on it. In an instant, there was an inexplicable feeling in his heart. As if it had sensed his arrival, the object shook slightly. Densely packed eyes of different sizes opened on its body. There were about 100 of them. As the eyeballs moved, they were overflowing with ferocious light. Long whiskers floated out and gradually extended, swaying in the hall. At the same time, hissing sounds could be heard, as if it was extremely happy. Zhang Yan tried a few times and found that this object also had intelligence. It was comparable to a 4- or 5-year-old urchin. Moreover, it was refined by him. As long as he thought about it, it would understand what he wanted. So he said, since you have a spirit, I should also give you a name. Your appearance was entrusted by me with the son of Datun. Its original name is Jie. But you are different from it. Today, there is a great calamity to pass. So I will call you Jie. Chapter 1152. In Pingdu sect, the hidden appearance pagoda suddenly shone brightly. Precious pearls hung down from the top of the pagoda, and thousands of strands of clear air flowed like dust being washed away. Everyone standing below felt refreshed, and even their own auras became livelier. Which god era suddenly, the pagoda door opened, and a ray of light shot out. Pingdu sect master Qi Hongchan walked out of the pagoda. However, compared to before he entered seclusion, he was like a portrait imprinted in this world. Although he was no different from an ordinary person, he seemed to be in a different world. Perfected Master Wu and Perfected Master Zhao only took a glance and were forced to keep their eyes open by the spiritual light above his head. They quickly lowered their heads and walked forward, bowing. Congratulations, Perfected Master, for coming out of seclusion. Qi Hongchan raised his hands and smiled. Perfected Masters, please rise. When I was in seclusion, I had to thank you for guarding the sect. Thank you for your hard work. Perfected Master Zhao said, this is what we should do. We don't dare to call it hard work. Perfected Master Wu straightened up and said, Perfected Master, are you? Qi Hongchan nodded and said in high spirits, with this opportunity, I have broken through the sixth barrier and formed an origin fetus. Although they had already guessed the result, the two perfected masters were excited to hear it from him. There were 16 major sects in Donghua continent, and almost all of them had people from grotto heavens guarding them. However, most of them were hovering before the second barrier. There were very few people who could form an origin fetus, and most of them only existed in the major sections. If the sect had a third stage cultivator, their reputation would immediately change. From then on, as long as Qi Hongchan was in the sect, no one would dare to look down on Pingdu sect as a small sect. Just look at the Yuanyang sect. It was because of a talented person like Chu Rui that they were able to support the sect. Sometimes, they didn't even have to give face to the three major sections. Qi Hongchan saw their expressions and shook his head. Perfected Masters, things are not the same as before. If I had reached this realm a few hundred years ago, I could have pushed our sect even higher. However, the great calamity is before us. There is no such chance. Zhao and Wu calmed down, they cupped their fists and said, we have forgotten ourselves. Qi Hongchan asked, did Qinsong School send any letters while I was in seclusion? The two of them moved to the side, allowing a disciple to come forward. He held a jade box in his hand. When he got closer, he bowed and held it up. He said respectfully, Headmaster, there was a letter from Qinsong School and a letter of thanks from Huanjin Temple. It was stated that it was for Headmaster Jinren. Qi Hongchan took out the letters from the jade box. He first brought the letter from Huanjin Temple to his eyes and opened it. He saw that it was from Pu Xianxing from Huanjin Temple. The content of the letter was to thank him for helping Immortal Pang capture the heavenly demon last time. He also said that if he had the time, he would like to personally pay a visit to thank him. This was not an important matter, so he put it aside for now. He then took the letter from the Qinsong School and read it. This time, his expression froze. He waved his hand at the disciple and said, all of you can leave first. I have something to discuss with the two Zenrens. The disciple bowed deeply and walked back down. He called out to all the disciples and servants standing at the side, and after bowing, he turned around and left. After they bowed, they all left. In a short while, they were all gone. The three of them rode on the breeze and rose to the white jade platform. Immortal Wu asked cautiously, Headmaster Jinren, is there something important in the letter? Qi Hongchan said, because I have an appointment with Headmaster Qin, I can't tell you the details yet. You only need to know that Pingdu cult is ready to act at any time. Zhao and Wu were shocked. They knew that this day would come, but they didn't think it would come so quickly. They looked at each other and bowed at the same time. They said, we will wait for Headmaster Jinren's instructions. Qi Hongchan said, when I was in seclusion, I had already roughly refined the hidden aspect pagoda. This pagoda is an ancient wonder. Because my cultivation has not reached perfection, I can't fully understand its changes. However, I can only use it now. Pingdu cult will at least have a way out in the great calamity, so the two of you don't need to worry too much. At this point, he turned to look at the scenery of the mountain gate below. It's a pity that when this calamity comes, this important mountain gate of Pingdu cult will most likely be difficult to protect. The two elders were extremely shocked when they heard this, but they followed the rules and didn't ask any more questions. Chi Hongchan said, I will travel outside in the next few days and go to the Chinsong school. Everything in the sect will be as usual. Don't let anyone see anything unusual. Zhao Zhenren said in a low voice, We will obey headmaster's orders. After Chi Hongchan gave his instructions, he was about to return to the pagoda to cultivate. However, just now, he was about to take a step when his figure paused. His eyes shone as he looked toward the north. Zhenren Wu followed his gaze but didn't see anything. He couldn't help but ask doubtfully, Headmaster? Chi Hongchan thought for a moment and said, It's nothing. I think fellow Taoists from the Chinsong school can handle it. After saying this, he turned around and leaped toward the spiritual eye in the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Zhao Zhenren and Zhenren Wu bowed to send him off. They only stood up after his figure disappeared. Zhao Zhenren sighed. I originally thought that after the precious pearl returned, there would be one more seat on the pagoda. If there were a few hundred years, we could try to promote a disciple to go up against the calamity. But from what headmaster said, we won't be able to make it in time. Zhenren Wu, on the other hand, was full of confidence. He said, If we feel that it's too hasty, then the other sect's preparations must be even more inadequate. Instead, we have the advantage. Just as Zhao Zhenren was about to speak again, his expression suddenly changed. He turned his head abruptly and saw a spiritual cloud soaring into the sky from the north. He and Zhenren Wu looked at each other and both of them leaped into the sky at the same time. They gathered their energy and looked over. They saw that it was a beam of light that penetrated straight into the high clouds. Zhenren Wu said, looking at that direction, it's from the northern dark star continent. It's just strange that this light is scattered but not condensed, and the spiritual opportunity is not abundant. Someone must have deliberately fiddled with it, but I don't know why they did it. They didn't use up their own mana. Zhao Zhenren said, maybe it's that northern dark star demon cultivator playing some tricks. Headmaster just now is aware of it. He said fellow Taoists from the Chinsong school can handle it, so it shouldn't be a big deal. Zhenren Wu nodded and said, then we don't have to worry about it. We don't know when the calamity will descend. The time is pressing, so we should go back and prepare early. After the two of them finished speaking, they flew off in different streaks of light, returning to their respective caves. The commotion was so big that the Zenrins from the Chinsong school immediately sensed it. They all stopped cultivating and looked in the direction of the northern dark star continent with inquiring eyes. Zhang Yan was in the upper extreme hall at the moment. He had already sensed it before the light appeared. His gaze was focused on the beam of light, and his eyes were cold. Qi Yuntian said, the area occupied by the Lord Yuanjuan's forbidden matrix has only expanded by half in this short period of time. There's still the figure of the matrix spirit in the light, and it's even more secure than before. If the demon court had such a trick before, they would have done it long ago and wouldn't have waited until now. There should be people from the Yuxiao school behind this. Zhang Yan said, once the power of the palace guarding matrix has increased, we won't act rashly before we have absolute confidence. We can only allow these demon cultivators to continue to exist in the northern dark star continent. This must be their goal. Qi Yuntian said in a low voice, this can be done in secret, but they purposely made such a big fuss. This is obviously a show for us, the Chinsong school. The meaning behind this is to say that the demon court has the support of the demon court, so they don't fear our attack. Zhang Yan smiled and said, this is also expected. When the forbidden matrix was erected in the South Sea, the Yuxiao school had to be on full alert in order to protect their backyard. Now that there's no one to disturb them, they will naturally extend their hands elsewhere. I have already suppressed half of the northern dark star continent, and I think I have offended them. They are extremely afraid that we will wipe out the hidden danger of the northern dark star continent, so they are using some means to salvage the situation. He thought for a moment and said, but we, the Chinsong school, have not been doing much recently, and even did not insist on setting up the matrix in the South Sea. The Yuxiao school must have grown suspicious, and may want to take this opportunity to see our reaction. Qi Yuntian changed his mind and said decisively, no matter what reaction we make, it may arouse their suspicion. The more we hide, the easier it is to be exposed. We don't need to care about them, we just need to do our own thing. The hundreds of years of planning of the Qinsong school is just like the surging waves of a mighty river, but it is not something these little tricks can stop. Zhang Yan nodded. But no matter how the situation changed, the demon court of the northern Darkstar continent was the main target of the Qinsong school, or they might be attacked from two sides. His arrangement in the South Sea was also for this purpose. But similarly, if Yu Xiao wanted to make a move, the first place they would clean up would be their own backyard. He thought for a moment and said, "We will not fight with him in the open, but we can use force in the dark." Compared to the forbidden matrix of the palace of Yuanjun, the matrix board that fellow Taoist Li left in the South Sea is far from comparable. If we really fight, if Yu Xiao uses all his strength, it will not be difficult to break through it in a short period of time. If we have not broken into Yuanjun's palace by then, we will be at a disadvantage, so we need to think of other ways. Qi Yuntian said, "Junior brother Zhang has been setting up in the South Sea for a long time. I think you already have an idea." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Originally I did have an arrangement, and I have reported it to the head immortal. But now that the situation has changed, I naturally can't stick to the old rules. My idea is that since we can't attack Yuanjun's palace before the disaster, we might as well send senior brother Hua's 36 mountains to the South Sea. It should be enough to hold back Yu Xiao for a while." Qi Yuntian thought for a moment, nodded and praised, "This is a good plan." Originally, Huaxian had made the 36 mountains to take care of the demon court before the disaster. Now, due to various reasons, it seemed that this matter could not be completed smoothly, so he might as well send this treasure to the South Sea to suppress the matrix board. Even if it was not as good as Yuanjun's palace, it would not be too far off. Chapter 1153. P.S. I have something to do these 2 days, so I can only write one chapter first. I will find a way to make up for the missing chapters. In the middle of Mount Fenglai in the Donghua continent, under the Cheng River, there was an aperture that had been silent for tens of thousands of years. But today, two lights suddenly appeared. It was Zhang Yan and Qi Yuntian who came together. This time, both of them came with a shadow doppelganger, so they did not alarm their peers. Zhang Yan stood in midair and looked at a huge pillar in front of him that could be hugged by 10 people. He said, "Is this the delimitation needle?" Qi Yuntian said, "It is this needle. Since ancient times, when someone dug the roots of the earth, in order to prevent people from doing the same thing again, Donghua and the other continents all have this pillar as a warning." Although Zhang Yan had heard of this needle for a long time and had seen it in the ancient books several times, he had never really come here to see it before. First, it was not easy to come here. Second, in order to prevent people from spying on it, there was a restrictive formation around it. Only the people of Dongtian could come in. At this moment, he looked at it carefully. Although this big pillar looked huge, what he saw was only a layer of mud outside, so it was not important. The most important thing was that the innermost part of it was a thin qi needle. This needle was refined by the cultivators of the Western continent in ancient times using the moving li qi. This qi was extremely sensitive. Once the body of the needle was exposed to the outside world, or if the qi of the earth was abnormal, it would send a warning to all the major sections. Qi Yuntian said, "I have given the 9 restoration Qian pillars to the 2 people of the Dongsheng continent and told them to refine it carefully. It will be completed in about 17 or 18 years. At that time, it will not be difficult to break through the barrier of Hunyuan and put it deep underground. But before that, we need to avoid this thing in case other sects notice." After the cultivators of the West continent and the cultivators from beyond the heavens worked together to conquer the Dongsheng continent, in order to avoid repeating the same mistake, they wanted to set a rule when they made the agreement. No one was allowed to refine treasures like the 9 restoration Qian pillars that could break through the barrier of Hunyuan. But at that time, there were still cultivators from beyond the heavens going back and forth in this world, so the agreement had no power to restrict them. Moreover, there were always some talented rogue cultivators in the world. They had never signed a contract, so they didn't have to worry about it. In view of this, the cultivators finally discussed and set up a warning signal above the Hunyuan earthly barrier and erected a fixed needle above each continent. As long as someone rashly touched the earthly qi, it would immediately be noticed by the sects that had established the agreement. However, this was an arrangement made 10,000 years ago. Nowadays, there were many ways to fool the fixing needle. Qi Yuntian turned his head and said, "For 10,000 years, there were only 5 grotto heaven cultivators who came here, and all of them came here to increase their knowledge. None of them were worried about the boundary needle, because they knew that anyone who dared to do anything to this place was equivalent to going against all the cultivators in the world." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It hasn't happened in 10,000 years, but it doesn't mean that it won't happen in 10,000 years. Now, everyone in the world knows that the tribulation is near. There's no way they wouldn't come to investigate. Perhaps there's more than 1 or 2 of them." Qi Yuntian nodded and said, "That's right, Qinsong School is going to make a move. Not only do we need to hide the boundary needle, we also need to find a way to fool the cultivators of the various sections." Luckily, Sect Master Jinren had already foreseen this and prepared this item. As he said this, he took out a ball of ethereal qi and held it in his palm. "I hope that junior brother can protect me." Zhang Yan bowed and said, "Senior brother, please do your best." Qi Yuntian walked forward and sent the ball of qi dynamic forward, allowing it to enter the mud pillar. Then he sat cross-legged. There was a spiritual light on his finger, as though he was slowly manipulating the spiritual opportunity. This ball of qi was refined in the spiritual eye of Qinsong School, and it could be used to set up an invisible barrier outside the qi needle. Once there was a change in the ground, the qi would first pass through this barrier, and then it would be transferred to the qi needle. But with this item, the process would be extended to tens or hundreds of years. The violent change that happened in one night would be delayed for such a long time, and the boundary needle would subtly think that it was a natural change in the qi of the earth, and would not easily trigger the alarm. In this way, unless it was someone like Master Lingya who personally came to check, there would not be any flaws in the next 100 years. And this kind of respected elder would not easily leave the sect, so there was no need to worry for this period of time. Now, the only thing that he needed to be wary of was the current situation. If any of the sects that signed the contract had a sudden impulse and sent someone over to check, there was a high chance that the person would notice something was wrong here. After Qi Yuntian made his move, Zhang Yan also sat down, but his spirit was constantly on the outside. Once the ball of qi was sent out, it could not be retrieved back, and if someone barged in at this time, it might spoil the whole thing. After 3 days of smooth sailing, he suddenly felt something in his heart. A wisp of spiritual vigor flashed across the sky. He immediately recognized that it was a shadow of a Taoist heavenly abode, and he was familiar with that qi dynamic. It's Qiao Jingdao from Yuanyang sect. What is he doing here? However, the qi only paused for a moment before passing by. However, it did not go far. It only paced back and forth above. Sometimes it would stop near, and sometimes it would stop far away. It was completely unpredictable, as if it was looking for something. Zhang Yan thought, with the impending doom, Yuanyang sect should also be preparing the method to pass the tribulation. Qiao Jingdao's clone might be here because of the rumor, but I didn't expect that this sect would not give up until now. Mount Fenglai used to be the headquarters of Honghe Monastery, a large sect in Donghua's middle continent. For some reason, several Taoist abode masters of this sect fought with each other, causing their headquarters to decline. Later on, it was replaced by Yuanyang. At that time, the Yuanyang sect was already showing signs of prosperity, so they seized the opportunity to take over the spirit cave. But the disciples of the Honghe Monastery were also stubborn. They knew that they couldn't do anything to the Yuanyang sect, so they pushed down the mountain gate of their own accord, sealed the formation, and destroyed all the precious medicines and spirit pills, so that the Yuanyang sect didn't get any benefits from them. According to the rumors, before the cultivators of the Honghe temple went to fight in the outer space, they had hidden all their treasures in a small world, including the Jikong map. However, no one had been able to find it ever since. However, Yuan Yang sect had never given up on searching for it during the past thousands of years. It was one thing for him to search for treasures, but if he discovered any abnormalities below, it might ruin his plans. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. Since he came here, he had prepared in advance. If the other party didn't come down to check, then there was no need for him to do anything. But if things didn't go as he wished, he had a way to lure him away. But if he did so, there would always be a loophole, so he didn't do anything. After Qiao Jingdao's doppelganger wandered in the sky for a day, it seemed to have no interest in the delimitation needle. Or maybe it had already been here before, so it didn't land to check. Finally, it returned to the direction of the mountain gate. Since it was related to the sect's plan, Zhang Yan didn't let his guard down. His eyes followed it until it landed on Mingbai Mountain. Another day later, Qi Yuntian had sent out all the profound qi in his palm. However, this shadow doppelganger had consumed too much Fa Li and was on the verge of collapse. He had already expected this, so he said, "I'll have to trouble junior brother to take care of the aftermath later." Zhang Yan said, "Don't worry, senior brother." Qi Yuntian said again, "It's a pity that I can't go to the North Darkstar continent to do this. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to put in so much effort." In reality, the 4 continents were one. If they moved the routes, they could do it in any continent, except for the South Cliff continent. Originally, the North Darkstar continent and the Middle Pillar continent could both be used as places to collect qi. But the Qinsong school didn't forget that Yu Xiao had used all kinds of methods to make these 3 continents fall into Yu's hands. Because they suspected that Yu Xiao had secretly set up some tricks, they were afraid that once they moved, it would immediately be sensed by Master Lingya. Even if it wasn't so, they couldn't take this risk. So, the most appropriate place to do it was the Donghua continent. Zhang Yan said, "Yu Xiao school isn't easy to deal with. If it wasn't for the constraints of various parties, causing them to be unable to set up Yuya in the Donghua continent, I'm afraid it would be a different story today." Qi Yuntian nodded and said, "This person Lingya has not appeared for thousands of years. He must be secretly setting up something. But as for what exactly he is doing, no one knows. The preparations that we, the Qinsong, have made for hundreds of years, may not be able to defend against it." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "If we can see through everything beforehand, then there won't be any disasters. For me, it's a disaster, but for Yu Xiao, it's also a disaster." Qi Yuntian laughed and nodded in agreement. After a few more words, Qi Yuntian's doppelganger slowly dissipated. Zhang Yan reached out and pressed down, erasing all the qi that was left behind. Then, with a shake of his body, he disappeared. At the same time, in the Xuanzi Sea realm, the seawater was tumbling, as if it was boiling. The sword qi that was originally hovering here turned from strong to weak, and from weak to strong again. There were already more than 100 of them, flying back and forth in the small world, causing all the aquatic creatures to hide, not daring to show their faces. Every time the sword qi turned back, it would take away a wisp of spiritual vigor. However, this place was in the 3rd upper hall of the Qinsong school, above the spirit cave. Every time the spiritual vigor was lost, it would be continuously replenished from the outside. At this moment, the entire sea realm surrounding the side hall was filled with sharp rainbow lights. It seemed to have the momentum to destroy everything, and it was still rising. A black flood dragon that was hiding under the sea could not bear the pressure. With a howl, it leaped out of the water and desperately flew out. However, after a few miles, it collided with several sword qi. Its body trembled and fell from the sky. Although there was not a single wound on its body, it was already dead. After an unknown period of time, the sword light suddenly converged and actually vanished in an instant. The surface of the sea remained calm for around 100 breaths of time before a clear sword howl resounded through the sky. At the same time, a myriad of sharp and fierce sword lights appeared once more, and they flew up into the sky in succession. After that, all of them shook in unison and collided towards the same spot. After a while, there was a loud thunderclap that could split a mountain. A ball of sword chi rose into the sky. It was like a bright crystal, sweeping through the clouds and spanning across the sky. As it flowed and rotated, the light appeared, and tens of thousands of rays of light shone brightly. After a long time, the sword chi retracted, revealing the figure of a Taoist. Ning Chongxian sat for a long time, his green robe fluttering in the wind. He held a magic sword in his hand, and after a while, he flicked his finger and chanted in the sword hum. The clouds stand above the dust, the green robe sweeps in all directions, the distant sword points to the south, the cold light of the thousand spirits building. Measuring the breadth of heaven and earth, the universe stands upright. Chapter 1154. After Ning Chongxian obtained the grotto heaven, he focused on comprehending the changes after entering this realm. Just as he was about to try out his divine sense, he suddenly felt something in his heart. He turned around and saw a talisman flying towards him. He picked it up and looked at it. He couldn't help but be moved. After pondering for a while, he put it into his sleeve. At this moment, a flying boat came from the sky and landed in front of him. Just now, it slowly stopped. Jingyu stood on the boat and said, "Zhenren Ning, the hall master invites you." Ning Chongxian kept his sword and stood up. He said, "I'll go now." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned into a rainbow and soared into the sky, piercing through the clouds and landing in front of the main hall of Duzhen Hall. Seeing his arrival, the 2 rows of tall Taoists half knelt on the ground and bowed respectfully. Ning Chongxian strode up the stairs and entered the hall. He saw Zhang Yan standing on the jade platform with a slight smile on his face. He stopped and greeted, "Right Hall Master." Ning Chongxian greets Hall Master. Even though he'd entered the Dao earlier than Zhang Yan, he was a person who attached great importance to seniority and etiquette. At this moment, as a subordinate, the etiquette he carried out was extremely strict and not the slightest bit disrespectful. Zhang Yan returned the etiquette and said with a smile, "Right Hall Master, forming a grotto heaven is a blessing for the sect. Just now, Sect Master Perfected has sent me a letter saying that he needs you to do something. When it's convenient for you, you can meet him in the hall." Ning Chongxian said seriously, "Since it's Sect Master Perfected's instruction, there's no reason to delay. I'll go immediately." As he spoke, he bowed and turned into a light and flew away. Zhang Yan looked at the light that left and thought, "Right Hall Master has also formed a grotto heaven. Including Perfected Mu, there are already 16 perfected grotto heavens in Qinsong School and many small realms in the sect. Usually, the consumption of spiritual opportunity is already at its limit. After the news spread, I think all the sects in the world will be wary of me. Without Sect Master Qin's grand plan, Qinsong School would only have 2 choices. Either it would remain stagnant and watch the spiritual opportunity of the spirit cave deplete. Alternatively, they could turn their heads and head out to seize more places of spiritual opportunity. However, no one really thought that Qinsong School would sit still and do nothing. From this moment on, the situation in the continent changed again. Several hours later, Ning Chongxian returned from the main hall and came to visit Zhang Yan. After the 2 greeted each other. After he sat down, Zhang Yan asked, "Does the sect leader have any instructions?" Ning Chongxian took a glance at Jingyu. Zhang Yan understood and said, "You may leave." Jingyu bowed and said, "Yes, master." After he left, Ning Chongxian looked over, raised his hand, and said, "My Duzhen Palace has a former palace master. Her name was He Jingchen. After this senior passed away, a body was left behind in the sect. I wonder if Hall Master knows about this?" Hearing him mention this, Zhang Yan was slightly surprised, but he did not intend to hide it. He said, "I know about this, and I also know about the whereabouts of spiritual Master He's body. Just now beside the earth-fire heavenly cauldron in Fengchen Courtyard, the servant beside me was originally listening to spiritual Master He. It was originally used by Zhenren He, but I wonder why Right Hall Master brought this up?" Ning Chongxian said, "When I broke into the grotto heaven, I felt a qi dynamic helping me from behind, but I didn't know who it was. After I succeeded, I received a letter, and it was signed by the former Hall Master Zhua Yuming, spiritual Master Zhua. The book recorded his cultivation experience, and there were also notes on several supernatural powers. However, at the end of the book, it mentioned that if it was convenient for the future generations, they could try to bring back Hall Master He's body and not let it be left outside. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and said, "So it was Hall Master Zhu's arrangement. Where is his letter?" Ning Chongxian took out the talisman book and said, "The letter is here." Zhang Yan took it and glanced at it. His eyes flashed slightly. When He Jingchen was the main hall master, Zhu Yuming just happened to be the left hall master. Although the two of them belonged to the same branch of the Truth Purification Hall, Taoist, Zhu stood on the sect master's side when he came into conflict with Qin Qinggang. However, He Jingchen didn't make things difficult for him after that, and it was very likely because of this that she left this letter. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Right, Hall Master, did Sect Master Zhu tell you about the sect's grand plan?" Ning Chongxian nodded solemnly and said, "I have been informed by Sect Master Zhu." Zhang Yan said, "Right, Hall Master should know that the matter with Spiritual Master He was because he had a disagreement with the previous Sect Master. According to Spiritual Master He's plan, only a few people from our Qinsong school could go to the Heavenly Cauldron, and the rest could be abandoned. Even if I was there, I would not take such an idea. Later on, no one cared about his body, and this was also the reason. Right now, my grand plan has not been launched. If I take back his body at this time, it will easily cause misunderstandings, and this is not appropriate." Ning Chongxian said, "Yes, I also know that this is not appropriate. However, since I have received Spiritual Master Zhu's legacy, I have to ask on his behalf to repay the ancestor's wish." Zhang Yan thought for a while and asked, "Does Sect Master know about this?" Ning Chongxian shook his head and said, "After all, this is our Duzhen Hall's matter. Without Hall Master's approval, I will not rashly report it to Sect Master." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "After all, this person is our Duzhen Hall's former Hall Master, and he also has the will of the previous Hall Master. Before this, I did not ask about it, but now it is not good to ignore it." Thinking of this, he said, "Once the Great Tribulation begins, the earthly fire Heavenly Cauldron may not be stable. If it is destroyed, it will be disrespectful to the ancestors. How about this? I will order someone to bring it to another place. However, if it wants to be worshipped with the body of the previous Hall Master, it will have to wait until after the Great Tribulation." Ning Chongxian thought for a while and said, "Hall Master's decision is appropriate. Your Highness is willing to follow this suggestion." Zhang Yan nodded and said with a smile, "Since Right Hall Master has formed a cave, you can be promoted to the Left Hall. As for the Right Hall, it can be settled by the capable disciples in the future." Ning Chongxian bowed and said solemnly, "At your Highness' command." After the two talked for a while, Ning Chongxian was about to leave. However, before he left, he suddenly said, "Hall Master, what does that world look like?" Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Since that world is just now opened, there may be a lot of great demons." Ning Chongxian asked, "Why great demons and not limitless glory?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It's always good to be prepared for danger first and safe after. Moreover, as soon as we step onto the path of the Tao, we'll be fighting with the heavens, the earth, and the people. If we only hope for good results and aren't willing to discern the dangers, then we'll have already lost the will to improve. Does Left Hall Master think so?" Ning Chongxian stood up and said, "That is the truth. Even if there are demons, we will just kill them with a sword." With that, he cupped his hands and bowed, then bid farewell and left. Zhang Yan sat for a while and then called Jing Yu over. He handed a talisman to him and said, "Go to Fangchen Courtyard later and send Jinren He's body to this small world. Just don't alarm others." Jing Yu was He Jingchen's follower in the past, so he was very clear about this Jinren's disagreement with the former headmaster. Of course, the main reason was that He Jingchen abandoned the group and left alone. After this matter was spread out, it caused displeasure in the sect. At that time, He Jingchen was pushed aside and eventually died of depression. Therefore, after receiving the talisman, he bowed and said, "Don't worry, Master. I know how dangerous this place is and will handle it properly." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "I am assured that you will handle it." Jing Yu bowed and left. Zhang Yan thought to himself and said, Jinrenzhua left this letter because he thought that Headmaster Qin would follow the path that Jinren he left behind. This action may be to hide Jinren He's body, but it may also be to remind Headmaster Qin not to repeat the mistakes of the past. However, this person probably did not expect that Headmaster Qin's mind is not limited to one sect or one family. With this step, either the world will be turned upside down and all the Jinren will return to silence, or the sky will be changed and the sun will be replaced. His gaze shot towards the letter, and he said indifferently, Since I've already gone beyond the heavens, why worry about the matters of the later generations? As soon as he finished speaking, he flicked his finger, and the letter instantly transformed into a ball of fluttering fragments. In the end, it transformed into ash that dispersed with the wind. Winter came and went, the sun and moon alternated, and 10 years passed in a flash. In the upper extreme hall, Qi Yuntian was sitting. A disciple came and bowed at the bottom of the stairs and said softly, Hall Master, the two people in the small world sent a letter today. Qi Yuntian raised his hand and took the letter. The two people in the small world referred to Gon and Ji. He opened the letter and was slightly surprised. In the letter, it said that the two people have already refined the 9 restoration Qian determination pillar, so they wrote to ask what the next step should be. Qi Yuntian originally thought that it would take them at least 17 to 18 years to refine this precious pillar, but now it seemed that the two people were very sensible. He wrote a letter on the spot and instructed the disciple, Send this letter to the right hall master of the Duzhen Hall. The disciple received the letter and left with the order. An hour later, an array door suddenly opened in the small world where Gan Shouting and Ji Xiangping were. Then a green-robed Taoist stepped out of it. After the two sent the letter, they were waiting for a reply. Now that they saw a Taoist cave master that they had never seen before, they came out to greet him and asked, May I know which Taoist master is here? The Taoist in green said, The right hall master of the Duzhen Hall, Ning Chongxian, is here under the order of the sect to protect the two of you. Protect? Gan Shouting was shocked and asked tentatively, Your sect wants the two of us to take action now. Ning Chongxian glanced at the two of them and said, Since the two of you have already refined the treasured pillars, why do you still need to wait? Ji Xiangping was shocked and said, Even if we have already refined this thing, what should we do with the earth qi that we have absorbed? There is nothing here to store it. Ning Chongxian said indifferently, The sect sent me here to deal with this matter. The two of you just need to control the precious pillar, there is no need to ask anything else. His Yu Xiao Thousand Snatching Sword scripture was extremely difficult to learn, but after he cultivated it to the grotto heaven, his power in fights of magical powers was not small, especially when it was used to snatch spiritual opportunity from the outside world. Originally, the earth qi needed to be moved with the help of magic weapons, but now that he was here, it was convenient to move. Ji Xiangping and Gan Shouting looked at each other and said in unison, In that case, we will start now. Chapter 1155. Ning Chongxian took out a talisman and threw it out. After the talisman flew out, it landed on the ground and turned into an array door about 10 feet in size. Soft rays of light shone from the door and shone on everyone. He leaned to the side and raised his hand, saying, My two friends, please. This was a small world, and activating the 9 return Qian pillar had to be done on the surface of Donghua continent. However, it was not convenient to do it here. Gan and Ji understood that since they had already signed the contract, they were already in the same boat as Qinsong School. If Qinsong School's plan succeeded, they might get a good result. If it failed, the outcome would be worrying. Since that was the case, they might as well put in more effort. Therefore, they did not resist at all. They bowed and walked toward the array door. The two only felt a flash of light before them. They had arrived in a ravine with high cliffs on both sides. They climbed into the clouds, and only a sliver of the sky could be seen. Below their feet was a flight of stairs made of jade bricks. The gap between the cliffs on both sides was so narrow that only one person could pass through at a time. Ever since they came to the Donghua continent, the two of them had been trapped in the small world of the Yutsong sect. Now that they were in the outside world, Their emotions were extremely complicated. They tried to use their mana, but they felt their bodies sink. They knew that they were suppressed by a prohibition and could not use the flying technique. They could only obediently walk down the passage. After walking for a few miles, they walked into a spacious crypt. The place was oblong in shape, and the top was covered by a light. Only the light was like stars, flickering slightly. It seemed like the void was endless, and they could faintly feel that it was connected to another array world. There were 81 ancient and heavy tablets around them. It was obvious that there were countless restriction runes carved on them, and they exuded an aura that even the two of them were afraid of. In the middle, there was a square well that was about a mile long and wide. Waves of air floated out from it, and 4 boys each occupied a corner. Each of them guarded a bronze crane with its beak facing down. Drops of silver-white liquid dripped down into a stone pot below, and there was a dripping sound. Ning Chongxian walked in and said, "This well is called the Netherworld Well. My Qinsong school has been digging for hundreds of years and has already connected it to the ground. It will save the two of you a lot of time." The 9 Serendipity Qian pillar was refined using the magnetic true sand. It only required a bit of magic power to be activated, and it would be attracted by the magnetic force under the Hunyuan earthly barrier. Therefore, the previous action did not require much effort from the two of them. But the difficult part was that after breaking through the Hunyuan earthly barrier, he needed to reverse the magnetic pull. Only by lifting up the jade pillar could the qi be extracted. Not only did this consume a lot of magic power, but when the distance was too far, no cultivator could do anything. The ancient cultivator's solution to this problem was to refine a qi rope to complement it. However, the materials needed to refine this rope could no longer be found, so they could only be replaced with other items. It could also be dissolved by the true power of magnetism, so he had no choice but to use a trick this time. Gon and Ji followed the instructions of the Qinsong school. They would refine their own blood essence into the pillar. This way, the pillar would be like a clone of them. When they activated the pillar, they would be able to attach their own spirit to it and dive into the depths of the abyss to extract the qi of the earth. It would not be that difficult to retreat. There were pros and cons to this. It was good to be able to advance and retreat at will, but there were few cultivators from the Xianmen underground. No one could say what would happen if they were not careful. Not only would they not be able to retrieve the 7 Serendipity pillar, their spirit might also be implicated and be heavily injured. Under such circumstances, the closer they were to the earthly barrier, the better it was. Ning Chongxian said, "I will receive the two of you from above. If the two of you lose any jade pillars, please inform me as soon as possible. The sect can also respond as soon as possible." This was the reason why sect leader Qin had refined many 9 return pillars in the past hundreds of years. It would take at least a few decades to extract qi of the earth. During this time, it was hard to guarantee that there would not be any damage. With a certain amount, this plan would not be interrupted. Gon and Ji bowed and said, "Don't worry, Master. We will definitely do our best." In order to refine this pillar, they knew that they had paid a great price. If they were to accidentally break it, they would still be the ones to suffer in the end. They had long since made up their minds to think of a way to protect this jade pillar. Ning Chongxian knew that for today, the sect had specially invited Zhou Chongju, the head of the Danding courtyard, to refine many elixirs. Even if the two of them lost their vitality, they could recover in a short period of time. However, to prevent the two of them from slacking off, he did not want to say it out loud. At this moment, seeing that the two of them seemed to want to say something, he asked, "Is there anything else?" Gon shouting cupped his hands and said, "This is what I am thinking. Can your sect send a few servants to listen to me? It would be best if they are strong men. If we can't move the jade pillars, we can ask them to help." Ning Chongxian thought for a while and said, "This is a reasonable suggestion. If the two of you have any other needs, you can mention it at the same time. Otherwise, when things come to a head, there will be more complications." It was not that the Qinsong school had not thought of this beforehand. It was because the two of them were not from the same sect after all. Of course, they could not put themselves in their shoes. However, now that they had brought it up, they naturally would not reject it. The two of them hurriedly said, "We dare not, we dare not. Apart from this, there is nothing else." Ning Chongxian said, "Then please wait for a moment." He used his finger as a pen and used his mana to condense a talisman book. With a gentle wave of his sleeve, he sent it out. After waiting for a long time, two mighty and majestic men came from the outside. They were more than 30 feet tall. They were the masked men from the third high hall who were in charge of moving the islands and the peaks. However, what they saw now was not their original size. To make it convenient to come here, they purposely made their bodies smaller. At this moment, the two of them knelt down and said, "He Gong, He Shou, we are here on the mountain gate's orders. We will listen to the three Jinren's orders." Gon Shouting did not know where the two of them came from. After asking a few questions, he found out about their abilities. He could not help but be overjoyed and said, "With such helpers, we will definitely get twice the result with half the effort." Ning Chongxian said, "Then there is no need to delay. Follow me." He raised his hand and waved. A cloud of qi flew over from the monument and wrapped around the three of them and the two masked men. Then, it was thrown into the netherworld well. Gon and Ji felt that they had passed through another formation door. When their feet touched the ground, they realized that they had landed in a cave hall built with solid stones. Ning Chongxian said, "This is the end of the mountain gate's forbidden formation. If we go further down, we will need to fly on our own." The two of them nodded to show that they understood. Ning Chongxian did not say anything else. He took the lead and the two of them flew down with the masked men. After an hour, they arrived in a cave hall similar to the one before. They finally stopped. Ning Chongxian waved his sleeves and swept away some of the black and filthy qi in the surroundings. He said, "I can only send you up to this point. You will need to rely on yourselves for the rest." Gon Shouting bowed and said, "We have signed the contract. We will definitely not let you down." The two of them first gave the two Taoists a few words of advice. Then, they took out the 9 revival pillar and placed it in front of them before sitting down. Not long after, they released a strand of their spirit and attached it to the jade pillar. The item swayed and suddenly flew up, descending deeper into the abyss. The two masked men did not need to look after each other. They each took out a talisman and stuffed it into their mouths. He stuffed it into his mouth and jumped down as well. The jade pillar traveled all the way down, and due to being pulled by the magnetic force, its speed became faster and faster. However, their souls were hidden within the treasured pillar, so they were unable to estimate the exact time in the outside world. They only felt that the journey was rather long. After an unknown period of time, he felt the pillar tremble. As if they had collided with something, both of their divine souls trembled. They knew that if there were no accidents, the jade pillar should have smashed through the Hunyuan earth barrier. It was not far from where the earth root was. After the two of them went down, Ning Chongxian sat cross-legged above. There was no spiritual opportunity here, only some filthy qi. It was also too filthy and contaminated with some magnetic force, so it could not be used for cultivation. It was only for daily cultivation, so he could only use elixir jade as a replacement. Once he was immersed, a month had passed unknowingly. On this day, suddenly he heard a rumbling sound below. He immediately woke up and looked down. The sound was getting closer. After 100 breaths, he saw 2 white shadows rushing up in front of him, as if they were going to a higher place. His reaction was fast. He reached out and grabbed them with mana. He said, "Jinren, you can let go now." The two of them restrained the jade pillar and hurriedly returned their spirits back into their bodies. However, the light in their eyes was dim, as if they had lost too much of their spirit qi. Gon Shouting cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for your help, Jinren. I didn't expect the repulsive force to be so strong after the magnetic force reversed. We almost couldn't control it." Ning Chongxian reached into his sleeves and threw 2 elixir bottles. He said, "This is the vitality elixir. Take it quickly." The two of them thanked him. After taking it, they identified the elixir and were delighted. They quickly kept it into their bodies and sat down to meditate. At this time, Ning Chongxian operated his mana, and rays of brilliance immediately leaped out from his body, collecting all the chi of earth contained in the jade pillar. Then, it gathered in his hand and turned into a sword gleam. He sent it upwards and turned into a ray of light to escape, quickly disappearing. After the sword of Qi flew out of the abyss, almost at the same time, all the Zhenren of Dongtian in Qinsong School sensed it and looked over silently. In the hall of Duzhen, Zhang Yan opened his eyes and looked over. Once the earth Qi was collected, it meant that the plan that had been planned for hundreds of years had really started. It wouldn't be long before a battle of life and death that would decide the future of the sect would come. The battle is coming. I need to cultivate the Qianquan leaf as soon as possible. I only hope I can make it in time. Over the past 10 years, the signs of the treasure's true consciousness transformation were getting more and more obvious. He believed that it was not far from his expectation. However, it was hard to say whether he could succeed before the disaster. Just as he was about to meditate again, he suddenly felt something. He sensed that there was a spirit qi in the realm that was about to move. It was extremely lively, like the flowing water of the Yangtze River, but also like the rushing tide. It contained a vigorous vitality. He turned around and saw that the direction was coming from the place where his eldest disciple, Lu Yenyi, was cultivating. With his cultivation, he naturally knew what it meant. His eldest disciple had been cultivating in the realm for many years and had gradually seen the doorway to that step. Unfortunately, judging from the current situation, she might only be able to leave the disaster for a few decades. She might be able to make it in time for the battle. He thought, once the tribulation of human begins, no one dares to say that they can definitely pass it. It might be a blessing not to participate in this battle. Chapter 1156. Qinsong School, Floating Heavenly Palace. On the platform in front of the hall, a rainbow light suddenly swirled and a clear qi scattered. After floating for a long time, two figures appeared. Sect leader Qin stood up from his seat and bowed, saying, "The two sect leaders have arrived." They were Pingdu Sect's sect leader Qi Hongchan and Huanzhen Temple's sect leader Pu Xianxing. The two of them returned the greeting and said, "Greetings, sect leader Qin." As a sect leader, it was naturally impossible for them to leave the sect easily. They came here with a shadow clone. Sect leader Qin invited the two of them to sit down and said, "Please wait for a moment. There's still a guest who hasn't arrived." Qi and Pu, the two heads nodded. After waiting for about a moment, on the other side of the platform, a spiritual light flew out of thin air. Then, a surge of spiritual vigor rushed up. Although it was only a ray of light, the two sect leaders felt their hearts palpitate. They could clearly sense that there were countless brilliant sword lights gathered and flew in this pearl-like light. It seemed like once it spread out, it had the power to split heaven and earth. As this light slowly spread out, a figure gradually walked out. In the end, a handsome Taoist in his 30s walked out. He raised his hands and bowed, saying, "Sect leader Qin, I'm here as promised." Sect leader Qin stood up and bowed solemnly, saying, "Greetings, sect leader Yu." As expected, it's Shaoqing Sect's sect leader Yu. Qi Hongchan and Pu Xuanxing's spirits were lifted. Although sect leader Qin had previously revealed that Qinsong School had an alliance with Shaoqing, the two of them weren't sure if it was just words of comfort. They couldn't be blamed for thinking too much. After all, in the past, this sect had only agreed verbally. It was more likely that they would act on their own in the end. However, seeing that Shaoqing Sect's sect leader Yu Xianshao had also arrived, they finally made up their minds. If the Shaoqing and Yutsong sects worked together, so what if they became enemies with the entire world? After the four of them greeted each other, they sat down. Sect leader Qin said, "My Qinsong School has already dug through the Hunyuan Earth Barrier 2 days ago. We have already obtained the Earth Qi." As he spoke, he waved his horsetail whisk and a thick aura floated up. Then, one of it floated into the sky while the others slowly sank. They were clearly separated and didn't disturb each other. Yu Xianshao could naturally tell that it was the Earth Qi that had just been extracted. The Yutsong sect was extremely decisive this time. They acted as soon as they said they would. He took a step forward and made the world his enemy without any hesitation. This was exactly what he wanted. After all, this was something that they had already agreed upon. They were already prepared for this day. After all, this was something that had been decided a long time ago. They had been mentally prepared for this day to come. However, the flow of earth energy was slow and orderly. The chaotic essence earthly barrier was like a thin membrane, breathing in and out. Between the opening and closing, the acupoints were opened and closed, and spiritual vigor was released. However, if it was forcefully broken by an external force, it would be different. Mountain of Mountain, Sect Qi times Zone Qiyang Clan Sect, and Qiyang Sect Mountain of the Q-Zone would Qi. The once, Q-Zone, the Earth, Yang Sect Master Qi, One Qi and Tao. There was even a possibility that it would affect the movement of the earth veins. That was something that could not be concealed. Therefore, they all understood that in at most 100 years, the Taoist grotto heavens of the various sects would sense the tremors of the earth's secrets. It was the day of the battle. At this moment, sect leader Qin looked at the three of them and said slowly, "Sect leaders, in the face of the great calamity, the most important thing is to distinguish between friend and foe." Although his gaze was clear, one could tell from his words. Behind it, there was a killing intent hidden within. Qi Hongchan stood up, cupped his fists, and said, "Everyone Yu Xiao, Tai Hao, Nenhua, and Butian have formed an alliance. These four sects are my greatest enemies." Yu Xianshao smiled calmly and said, "There are two forces in this world. If sect leader Qin wants to go to outer space, the demonic sect will not trust me. They should view me as an enemy." Pu Xianxing thought for a while and asked, "What about the primordial Yang sect?" Sect leader Qin said, "Although Chu Rui is a rare genius, he is responsible for the rise and fall of a sect. He is too burdened, so he is too conservative. If he is not confident, he will not lean to any side. When the tribulation begins, if I say that I want to go to outer space, as long as he has a safe path of retreat, he will definitely not follow me." Pu Xianxing took in a deep breath and said, "In that case, other than our four sects and the forces that our sects depend on, all the cultivators in the world will be enemies." Sect leader Qin did not avoid it. He nodded and said, "That's right." Yu Xianshao looked calm as if he did not care about his opponents at all. He only said, "Although there are not many cultivators in our Shaoqing sect, no one in our sect fears death. This time, we can let everyone in the world know the sharpness of our sword." Qi Hongchan's expression became serious. He reminded them, "No matter how dangerous the situation is, our Pingdu sect will advance and retreat together with you." Sect leader Qin said slowly, "Once the tribulation begins, it will be a battle of life and death. All the sects will not hold back anymore. They will definitely use their sect-guarding treasures, especially Yu Xiao, who has the help of Butian Pavilion. They have a few magical treasures that are specially used to deal with the 9 continents' Great Tribulation, so we must be on guard. Today, I called the three of you here to discuss how to deal with this matter." Pu Xianshao and Qi Hongchan's hearts trembled slightly. If one only looked at strength, Qin Song and Shaoqing sect already occupied half of the profound sects in the world. With the addition of these two sects, even if there was also the devil sect, they could still fight. However, the battle between sects was not so simple. Especially when it involved the sect-guarding treasures of the sects, they had to be even more cautious. Although Butian Pavilion only had 2 heavenly abode masters, at that time, the methods that they could use would probably be far above Taihao sect and Nanhua sect. In this kind of competition, there were no tricks to speak of. If it was 1, then it was 1. If it was 2, then it was 2. It all depended on who had more tricks up their sleeves and who was more prepared. However, everyone here knew that sect leader Qin had been planning for this matter for close to 1,000 years. The other side was only forced by the Great Tribulation and the power of Qinsong, so they temporarily gathered together. They originally had different thoughts, so they would not pay attention to the way of coordination. As long as they did not give them the chance to unite and plan, they still had a good chance of winning. The 4 sect leaders were discussing countermeasures here. In the Duzhen Palace, Zhang Yan was sitting in the deep abyss heavy water with his eyes closed, training his martial arts. At this moment, a ray of spiritual light suddenly came over and circled above the soil platform. He felt something in his heart, so he took out a spell and escaped from the heavy water. Then, he raised his hand and summoned the spiritual light. It was a flying letter. He glanced at it and said, "So it was Senior Zhou who called me. I think there must be something." He thought for a moment, then touched the space between his eyebrows. A ray of sword light was released, and he went out of the Xuanze ocean realm, heading towards the great pool of dragon abyss below. Along the way, he casually looked around and saw that the disciples were still the same as before. They did not know that the great tribulation was coming. The dozen or so heavenly abode masters in the sect were like the deep sea. On the surface, there were no waves, but on the inside, it was surging. Obviously, after knowing that the mountain gate had broken through the earth barrier, everyone was seizing the opportunity to prepare for the great battle that was not far away. In just a moment, the ray of sword light arrived at the Danding courtyard. Then, it landed on the fish boat, and its silhouette appeared. It said outside, "Is Senior Zhou here?" Junior Zhou sure came fast. Zhou Chongju laughed and walked out. Glancing at him, he turned sideways and said, "Junior Marshal brother, come inside with me to talk." Zhang Yan looked up and saw that there was a lot of white hair on his head. He was surprised and said, "Senior Zhou?" Zhou Chongju waved his hand and said with a smile, "It's fine. I spent too much effort refining pills for the sect earlier, and that's why it's like this. Don't worry, I can't see Lingya die, and I won't be willing to abandon the world no matter what." Zhang Yan followed him into the pavilion. After sitting down, he asked, "What kind of pill is it that made Senior Zhou spend so much effort?" Zhou Chongju chuckled and said, "I was about to tell you, Junior Zhou." At this point, his eyes shone brightly and he said, "Pills can save people, but they can also hurt people. Long before you entered the Duzhen Hall, the sect leader once asked me to refine a pill that can injure the cultivators of the Grotto Heaven. It's just that I'm not a person of this generation, so it was quite difficult for me to refine it. I only made progress 100 years ago." Zhang Yan sighed and said, "If that's the case, why didn't Senior Zhou come to me? Although my alchemy skills are far from Senior Zhou's, I can be considered to have entered the door. I believe I can help Senior Zhou." Zhou Chongju shook his head and said, "Wouldn't that delay your cultivation? Moreover, this matter was entrusted to me by the sect leader in private, so it's not convenient for me to tell you." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Senior Zhou called me here today. Is it because the pill has been refined?" Zhou Chongju smiled and said, "That's exactly why. However, my cultivation is shallow, so it's not easy for me to judge. That's why I invited you here to take a look." He took out a jade bowl from his sleeve and saw that it was filled with clear water. Inside, there was a golden carp the size of a finger. It was swimming around in the water with great agility. With a flick of his finger, the fish flew into the air. As soon as it left the water, it actually grew wings on its back and transformed into a young kingfisher. It chirped and flew around the pavilion as if it was looking for a way out. However, after searching for a long time, it didn't find a way out. Its body actually shattered and turned into many small ants. They crawled all over the ground as if they wanted to find a way out. However, this didn't work. It actually turned into a wisp of smoke and flew into the air. After that, it gave birth to another 10 or so transformations. Zhou Chongju stroked his beard and said, "Changing according to the spirit, moving according to the time, that's the nature of this pill." Zhang Yan praised, "The spiritual vigor of this pill is so weak that it's beyond common sense. If I didn't examine it carefully, I wouldn't have noticed it. If I were to fight with someone and this thing invaded me, I would most likely ignore it and fall into a trap. Senior Zhou is really good." Zhou Chongju smiled and said, "It's easier said than done to refine a pill that can injure a person from a heavenly abode. I tried my best and still couldn't achieve it. After thinking about it, why do I have to do this? Even if it's a battle between people from a heavenly abode, it depends on the timing. I only need to temporarily disturb them. As long as their opponent isn't stupid, they can seize the opportunity." As he said this, he sighed and said, "This is my proudest work in my life. In the future, if I have the same precious material, even if I have to sacrifice my life, I won't be able to refine it again." He stretched out his hand and the pill that had already turned into a handful of dust flew over and landed in his hand. It turned into a pill and was delivered to Zhang Yan. "This time, I have refined a total of 12 wishful spirit pills. I will give this one to junior brother." Chapter 1157. In the Azure Sky Hall, a pretty maid with a beautiful figure entered the hall with a jar in her hands, trembling with fear. On top of the jade platform, there was a flattened monster that looked like a kite lying there. Its body moved up and down as though it was breathing. It did not have any claws or teeth, as though it was harmless. However, she knew that this was a ferocious monster that the hall master had brought back from somewhere. No matter what kind of beast it would be swallowed by it. The maidservant did not dare to go near it. She placed the jar down from afar and hurriedly retreated. After she left, she could not help but pat her chest in relief. However, she immediately revealed a worried expression. Tomorrow, it will be Sister Chio's turn to deliver food. However, Sister Chio is so timid. Once she enters the hall, she probably won't even be able to move. What if the monster suddenly becomes excited and eats her up? She and the maidservants were all in the form of kingfishers. Strictly speaking, they were also monsters. As for the segment monster, it was refined from the remains of a sky demon. One could imagine how much pressure it exerted on her. Just now, just getting close to it was enough to make her tremble in fear, not to mention coming to deliver food every day. At this moment, in the hall, the segmented monster raised its body and floated up from the jade platform. It glided forward and arrived above the jar. Several long tentacles extended from the edge of the jar. With a light sweep, it lifted the jar into the air and flipped it upside down. From the mouth of the jar, a grayish-white pill the size of a longan sprinkled out. In the belly of the segment monster, there was a long slit, revealing several rows of teeth. It opened its mouth and swallowed. Following that, there was a chewing sound in the hall. It could not swallow spiritual opportunity like a cultivator. Every day, it could only swallow the medicinal stones it had refined to nourish and strengthen itself. However, it was still not satisfied. There was always a desire to bite living things and drink fresh blood. There was a reason for this. Most of the things that formed its body were the remains of a sky demon. It was inevitable that it would be tainted with some demonic nature. Although it did not need to swallow blood, it was born with such a nature. It was difficult to get rid of it, or else it would be restless. Just a little provocation would cause it to become ferocious. Hence, every 3 to 5 days, it had to swallow a mountain elephant. Fortunately, the Azure Sky Hall was comparable to half a continent, especially with the plains and tall mountains outside the hall. Over the years, there were many birds and beasts that had multiplied and strengthened here. They formed their own tribe, and this mountain elephant was taken from the elephant garden. However, the demon severing stage's body was growing too quickly. Not long ago, it was already difficult to satisfy a mountain elephant in a few days. However, the maidservant did not notice it and still dealt with it as usual. Therefore, she appeared a little irritable recently. It could sense that there were countless fresh and delicious food outside the palace. It couldn't bear it any longer and wanted to rush out. However, there was a restriction blocking his way. After ramming against it a few times, he discovered that his entire body was covered in blood. Only the tentacles could reach the outside world. But even so, as soon as he went outside, he would be struck by the lightning, so he could only retreat. The segmented monster let out a few screeches before crouching on the ground with its eyeballs rolling around. He seemed to be thinking of countermeasures. After a long time, its body wriggled for a while, and then a crack appeared on its body. Then a strange fragrance was released. It smelled like flowers and fruits, and it also smelled like mushrooms. There were many spirit beasts outside the palace. When they smelled the fragrance, they were all attracted over. At this time, a spirit badger had already leaped onto the steps. This beast was raised by a servant girl, so compared to the other birds and beasts, it was a bit bolder. However, just as it approached, a tentacle stretched out and quickly wrapped around it. Then, it was dragged into the hall with incomparable speed. The birds and beasts outside the door were all frightened away. The spirit badger was wrapped in the segmented demon's abdomen. In just a short while, its skin, flesh, bones, and blood had all melted away. After eating its fill, its ferocious aura subsided slightly, and it returned to the jade platform to sleep. A few days later, spiritual light flashed outside the palace. A clear aura came up from below and vibrated the spiritual bell, causing it to ring endlessly, causing the entire palace to hear it. When the aura dissipated, Zhang Yan was already standing on the high platform of the Azure Sky Palace. Su Su had been waiting there since the moment the sound rang out. At that moment, she quickly walked over and bowed. "Greetings, master." Zhang Yan looked at her and asked, "Get up. How's the segmented demon?" Su Su replied, "According to the palace master's instructions, blood food will be sent to it once in a while, but it's not allowed to eat its fill. However, this strange demon's ferocious aura is getting stronger every day, causing many sisters to not dare to go near it." Onad 2, Zhang Yan asked, "Has anyone been injured?" Su Su shook her head. Zhang Yan nodded. It was his intention to send maidservants to deliver the food. Previously, when the segmented demon's intelligence was just born, he had given an order to it that it could devour blood food, but it was not allowed to harm anyone. As long as this demon could resist doing that, it meant that even when it was hungry, it could still suppress its ferocious nature before he, its master, gave the order. If not, it meant that there was a possibility that it could break free from his control. At most, in a few decades, he would be competing with all the perfected ones in the world. This battle was extremely dangerous, and he could not afford to make any mistakes. Even if there was a possibility that this demon would not listen to his orders, he would rather destroy it than bring it with him. He was satisfied with the outcome, so he walked towards the main hall. Once he entered, the segmented demon also noticed his arrival. It immediately revealed a joyful expression and flew into the sky. It kept circling around him and made hissing sounds. However, it was afraid of the spiritual vigor that surged from his body. It seemed to want to get close to him, but it did not dare to get too close. Zhang Yan's gaze focused on its body. After looking for a while, he suddenly flicked his finger. A sword gleam flew out and instantly slashed a wound on the segmented demon's body. The demon wailed and fell to the ground. It was trembling nonstop. Even though it was inexplicably injured, it did not dare to resist at all. At the same time, the wound healed quickly. In just a breath or two, it returned to its original state. Zhang Yan nodded slowly. This demon's body was more than 10 times stronger than the last time he saw it. When it grew up, it would probably be able to display its true ferocity. Sky demons needed to grow with their lifespan before they could produce almighty ones. Normally, this process would take tens of thousands of years. However, this segmented demon was refined using the living refinement technique. It only needed a few decades to pass this period. By then, he would have another trump card in his hands. Seeing that the segmented demon was still trembling, he said, "Get up and cultivate well. The next time I come, I hope that you can block my sword. Otherwise, you will be useless." Onad 3. After saying that, he turned around and walked out of the hall. He said to Su Su, who was waiting at the door, "In the future, double the amount of blood and flesh. The rules are the same as before." Su Suan replied, "Yes, your servant obeys." Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves, and many talismans flew out. He said, "With this talisman on you, you will not have to worry about your life." Su Su was overjoyed and knelt down to thank him. However, she felt a rainbow flash in front of her. When she looked again, she saw that the beam of light had already left the Green Sky Hall and landed in East Flower. On an island in the Great Dragon Lake, Ning Chongxian rode on a breeze and left. As he continued to strike the earth barrier with the 9 return pillars, the gap below became wider and wider. Earth chi surged up and could be harvested with a talisman. There was no need for him to stand guard here. As for Gon and Ji, they had already done what they needed to do. There was no need for them anymore and they were sent back to the small world. This time, he wanted to return to the true purification hall to cultivate. However, halfway there, he was stopped by a child who said that Sun Jinren was summoning him. Since his master was summoning him, he did not hesitate and immediately set off for the Changguan Grotto Heaven. He was very fast and arrived in front of the Grotto Heaven in a short while. After reporting, he entered and stood in front of Sun Jinren. He bowed and greeted, "Disciple greets master." Sun Jinren said, "Since you are already a Grotto Heaven, you can dispense with these formalities if you want." However, Ning Chongxian insisted on finishing the greeting. Sun Jinren shook his head and smiled, "It's up to you." He returned to the couch and sat down. He said, "Sect Master has been planning for hundreds of years. Soon, it will appear in the world. However, most people in this world are short-sighted. Once the calamity is over, there will not be many who are willing to go to the outer world with me. There will be many who are my enemies. Disciple, you must be careful." Ning Chongxian said, "As a disciple, I can only fight with all my strength." Sun Jinren nodded his head and said, "That's right. Sect Master is in charge of the overall situation. As a disciple, it's useless for us to think too much. However, what we need to prepare cannot be omitted. Otherwise, we will only be showing off our bravery and losing our lives in vain." Ning Chongxian bowed and said, "Disciple seeks Master's guidance." Sun Jinren said, "Now that you have entered the elephant realm, you can try to train your fighting skills in these few decades. However, if you want to improve your cultivation, it will not be easy. Especially since you have not opened a Grotto Heaven, you will lack a life-saving skill. I think it is inappropriate. After thinking about it, I might as well give you the Grotto Heaven that I obtained in the past. Although the senior who opened this Grotto Heaven is not compatible with your cultivation, fortunately, you do not need to manage it." His Changguan Grotto Heaven was opened by himself, but there was another Grotto Heaven in his hands. This was passed down by the senior, and the Billowing Cloud secret book was obtained from it. Because it was a spiritual Grotto Heaven, there was no need to refine it from time to time. That was why it was passed down to him. Ning Chongxian did not decline. He bowed deeply and said, "Thank you, Master, for your kindness." Sun Jinren said, "You are my disciple, of course I should take care of you. It is a pity that spiritual Master Zhuo's Grotto Heaven went beyond the sky with him. Otherwise, I would have begged for it for you even if I had to put down my pride." Ning Chongxian said, "After this success, I received a letter from spiritual Master Zhuo, which recorded the comprehension of the heart, divine arts, and secret arts. I have already benefited a lot from the Tao of the sword. How would I dare to ask for more?" Sun Jinren laughed and said, "I don't think so. If there are benefits, I should fight for it. How can I give in? If there is injustice, I should speak my mind and criticize right and wrong. This is the way to cultivate Tao." Without waiting for Ning Chongxian to speak, he waved his hand again. "Forget it. You have reached this stage, you already have your own Tao. There is no need for me to give you more pointers." With a flick of his sleeve, a talisman flew down. He said, "This is the entrance talisman that I have refined. Keep it well." After Ning Chongxian received it, he placed it in his avatar. Sun Jinren said again, "There is one more thing. You do not have a protective treasure with you. In the future, you will be at a disadvantage when you face other cultivators. Even if you refine it now, you will not be able to make it in time. You can only try to borrow a treasure from the ancestral hall. The day after tomorrow, Sect Master will summon us to discuss this." Ning Chongxian bowed and said, "I will listen to Master's arrangements." You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.